Okay, we're live. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to Saturday Free School for Technology and Black Liberation. I know that people have been waiting on comments already. So yeah, I guess we're all eager to get started. And so last weekend we just had this, so we just had a very beautiful symposium titled "Seizing Our Future" on the revolutionary music of Ellington, Mingus, Sandra, and Bootsy. And today we'll talk about reflecting on the event. Especially, we're going to talk about what was the vision that we set out with the event and what did we try to achieve politically. And I think one of the important things for me also is what are the questions that we put on the table in our discussions and the whole event, and how do we take this forward, in the next few weeks in our discussions. So I'll ask Dr. to start us off.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. And I'm going to say a few things, but then Michelle and Kathy and Serafina will also add. There's a lot to talk about. The format was the first time that we did anything like that. And I think this may have been the first symposium or conference on these composers. And certainly, I would say, it was the first time that this music was contextualized as a political and ideological force, and that the composers and musicians were not mere musicians. They were aware of the political tasks, the ideological tasks, and actually the civilizational tasks. And their consciousness led to a new music, a music that transcended, I think, certainly all musics of the modern period, certainly of modern Europe. And now I think we concluded that that to go forward politically and ideologically and philosophically, music must and will play a central role. I was thinking about this a lot. Now I can't get my thoughts together. So forgive me for being a little bit slow. Just a few things. It was a very emotional event. It was emotional from almost the moment we started organizing it. And it was emotional on one side, well, because of this great beauty and the great courage, great sacrifice that these composers and musicians made. But it was also emotional because it raises certain questions about the society and about the civilization. How is it that Ellington is not taught to children from the time they enter a school? By the way, I think one of the accomplishments of the symposium was that we had children. I want to come back to that, who participated, by the way.
Yeah.
But we discovered the enormous significance of this music. And, when you discover something, some truths, it is emotional, because it makes it possible to see a way forward. And I think one of the things that came out of this is that even though we have spoken repeatedly about the crisis the crisis of civilization, the crisis of the ruling class, and all of that. I don't think and you all can say if it's true, I don't think we saw the way forward as clearly as we see it now. And even though we've spoken of the combination or the synthesis of art and science, I don't think we realized it as concretely as we now do. So much so that going forward to the Knowledge and Science Conference in June, which Barto and we'll talk about our first meeting. But, we had talked about, sorry, Al, we had talked about the inadequacy of 18th and 19th century epistemologies. In particular, Kant, because we're reading him, his Critique of Pure Reason. But I think it became even clearer that any epistemology of this moment in history will require the synthesis of art and science. How that will be done is a completely a question that we will try to work out in the science conference. However, I think we began to see how art, and not just as art, but art as purposeful and connected to the people striving for democracy and freedom and progress, if you want to use that language. I think it became clear to us how all of this can be brought together. I think it became even clearer to us, we've been talking about this Du Bois as the originary figure of a New World movement of thought. Well, we had concrete evidence of the manifestation of that in this great music. Sun Ra, of course, is very bold in his claims and predictions, but the same kind of a sense of purpose, you hear it in Mingus and Ellington. The other thing is that all of them explicitly have this Afro-Asiatic framing of a new world. It's so explicit in Ellington, it's very sweet, and so on. But then it's in Sun Ra. One of the things that I was talking to Kathy about this, we wish we had done more on his opposition to nuclear weapons. And he was forthright. He produced several suites and so on the question of preventing nuclear war. So it was this discovery and planning and researching, but then in the actual symposium, this is one thing to plan and then to implement it, to have to present research that you've done, to answer questions. We saw it, and I don't know if everybody saw it the way we did, maybe, I don't know, but we saw it so deeply and so personally. And it was like, after seeing how this was unfolding, you say, yeah, this is what it is. And it's like no going back. I thought the way that throughout we dealt with these theoretical questions of the postmodern paradigm, which is with us, it will be with us as we go through the Knowledge Conference in June, but it's all over academic discourse. And so this definition or this identifying of Sun Ra with Afrofuturism. Nice sounding word, but what is its essence? And so, in doing the research and studying Sun Ra, we concluded that you cannot understand Sun Ra through that framing, through a postmodernist identity politics, even queer politics type of explaining him. A lot of people, they say, well, he's an Afrofuturist. And once they say that, they don't have to listen to his music. And we realize that you put these three, I'm leaving funk out for the moment, because it's more of a derivative, and I think that's the way Kathy put it, a positive derivative of from really from Sun Ra. But when you put these three together, you have a massive body of work. It's not just one suite. I think Ellington produced at least 4 or 5, the Afro-Eurasian, the
Far East Suite. Far East Suite.
Far East Suite,
Even Black, Brown,
The River.
Black, Brown, and Beige.
Concert.
Yeah, I mean, and so this, and all three of them are producing symphonies, and they wanted to produce these great symphonies. And of course, Ellington and Ailey,
Yeah.
which meant that they were composing music for many forms of performance, for dance, for the symphonic thing, the small ensemble. And it's just so much music, so much thought, so much creativity. There's nothing like it in the modern world. And of course, Mingus, and I know it was very emotional for Michelle that, this feeling that the music industry and even other jazz musicians had unfairly labeled him an angry man. And he was angry, but he was also filled with love. And he produced all of this unbelievable music. They were composers. Nothing comes close to it in America and in the European 20th century and maybe the European 19th century. We kind of said in our planning that we didn't expect jazz musicians to come. I was wrong. One came. But there were other musicians, Fatih, who is a classically trained pianist, and Karen Smith, who is a percussionist, a drummer. But for the most part, the jazz musicians didn't come. And I think Sun Ra would have predicted it too, because they know it all. They're so hip. They're so, above everybody else. But they didn't come. And of course, I'm going to ask the ones I know, why weren't you there? I did see Osiris this morning. He was playing. I tried to interrupt him to ask him, why didn't you show up? But he wouldn't let me interrupt him. As Sun Ra said, one of the great problems of jazz, if you want to call it that, are jazz musicians. And, we were able to listen to a lot of interviews and to read biographies. And it's very revealing. First of all, you take Sun Ra. He lived monastically and in a very humble environment all of his life and all of the time here in Philadelphia. He was not interested in getting rich, famous, becoming a jazz celebrity, or getting a Grammy for the jazz. I mean, to even think of Sun Ra being given a Grammy, so it would have blown the Grammys up. I mean, but one question that we have to think about, and we were thinking about it, is Sun Ra the end of jazz? And maybe Ellington was, and Mingus, and that you get this, which is so ironic, and in Philly, we go to jazz concerts and so all these jazz musicians, but they're playing something different and they have a different purpose and a different worldview than Sun Ra or Mingus or Ellington do. They're entertainers, albeit with a hip kind of pose. But Ellington and them were not that. You can interview most jazz musicians in the city, and you can talk to them for the next 2 weeks, and they'll never mention the purpose of this music, and that it's a struggle for freedom. Because they're not about the struggle for freedom, they're about, entertainment and getting paid. And we've interviewed so many of them. But what we also found is that the presence, well, if we just take Sun Ra, which we have to do more on, Sun Ra's presence, the spirit of Sun Ra is all over Philadelphia. Arts Nova, solar myth. And as we said, you look at the paintings, the work of the painter Barbara Bullock, you see a lot of Sun Ra. And I think especially in the Jasmine Garden series, it'd be good to find out what her relationship to Sun Ra was. I know she lives in Germantown. And we were really graced with the presence of Ransom and Miyoshi, both of whom knew Sun Ra and members of the orchestra. And I remember one of the first times I met Ransom, which is not that long ago. We both said to each other that our favorite musician was Sun Ra. And for me, he is, and I was so happy to find another person who felt the same way. But it turns out that I guess back in the 80s, when Ransom was working at Temple University Hospital, he drove an elevator and he had a chance, there were periods where he didn't have to be working. And he said he looked in the phone book and found Sun Ra's phone number in the phone book. And he called him. And Sun Ra said, call me every Tuesday at 12 o'clock. And he did for many years, and they spoke. And then Miyoshi, who lived up there in the neighborhood, talked about how Sun Ra and the orchestra were just a part of that working class community. And how Sun Ra would walk around and say hello to people and talk to kids and everything. That was really eye-opening. And I think then that it was done here in Philadelphia. Now, I know Kathy wrote an essay on Archie Shepp and the book Free Jazz Communism, and connected it to the movement in North Philly. It's a great essay. But Philadelphia is one of those special cities. It's almost like Sun Ra's magic city, and we feel it all around us, this great artistic potential, which, you become a bit frustrated with, because the artists and musicians and painters have seemingly dropped the ball politically and intellectually. I'll just end on this. I think the symposium was a landmark symposium for many reasons. I think the people who were here, including the fact that there were children. Now, of course, children just don't come on their own. Their parents must bring them, which means the parents must have a certain level of consciousness. But there were children here. Children participated. Children listened, which says to us that that is an audience for what we do. And we have to find a way to make it possible for children and teenagers to come to these events. You know, almost, well, like Alice and Brandon at South Philly High School. You know what I'm saying? And the fierce desire of the kids that you all worked with to read Baldwin. And the one kid that said, I want to read Baldwin because I want to live. And so he may have been expressing something that is more general among children and teenagers. I think maybe, and we were kind of kicking this back and forth as, you know, in the planning for the Knowledge Conference, you know, that symposium may have severed forever any relationship that we have to the white left. First of all, they live in a time and space that no longer exists. They want a past that only exists in their delusional imaginations. I think what this showed, and John Jeter, you know, on Facebook, he said this, I don't know whether you all follow John Jeter. He said on Facebook, I looked at it today, that Norman Finkelstein is a white supremacist. Did I show it to you? I want to show that to you all. And he's absolutely right. When Norman Finkelstein talks about the high achievement of intellect, of art, and so, he's only talking about white people and Europeans. You know, when he talks about academic achievement, he's only talking about elite white universities. The historically black colleges are mediocre, and the students are mediocre, in spite of the fact that the students from those colleges changed the world or changed this country in the 50s and 60s. But I just don't think that that we have anything in common any longer with the white left. We, I think, in good faith, kept our doors open, keep our doors open, hope that they will come to events like this. But see, it says something. You're dealing with three of the greatest composers of modernity. They are black, and you so Marxist, and you so down, and you so into the class struggle that you can't show up. See, that kind of trivialization of black people, you know what I'm saying? It's unacceptable and intolerable. And it is a form of blatant white supremacy. I don't care if they got black people in it. It is a capitulation to white supremacy. Black achievement don't mean a damn thing to them. And any time where the center, and this is, Kathy said, you know, there are a lot that we weren't able to complete, but any time, I don't care who you are, that the only thing in black music that has any relevance to you is hip hop. That is a white supremacist attitude towards black achievement. All of this symphonic and other forms of music that took into account the world people's struggle, And you're going to tell me about some corporate pop culture? And that's what's supposed to be the voice of Black young people? That is white supremacy and a capitulation to white supremacy. And I think going forward, I think we should make it unequivocally clear that we want nothing to do with the white left. This is me talking, y'all don't have to take it, at all. But I'll stop there.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I had said some of what I had thought earlier in the week when we met, like for the Wednesday reading group, but also absorbing like what you just said. I feel like I wanted to say again that I do think that we clarified our political and revolutionary task and also learned directly from each of the first three composers in particular, Ellington, Mingus, and Sun Ra. Like, for example, Mingus's unwavering and fierce articulation of the evil of white supremacy and that a defensive position must be made in order to protect the people and their music. Like, and then Sun Ra, the science of Sun Ra, the new theory, the new language of Duke Ellington, constructing a worldview that constantly has to be shielded from like white assumptions or white epistemology. And I felt that so much in our research and then in the journey of the symposium itself, like that direct relationship or that direct lesson that I know for someone in my position, I heard a lot from each of those composers. But I was still want to think a little bit more, but something that I did want to say to what you said was, I think what was important is that we made a defense of the integrity and the purpose of these musicians. And it sounds so plain, but I just want to state it again, because not only did we sever ourselves further from the white left, or basically put a stake in the ground that the white left is not able to compute or contend with, or that is, let's say, like a mirror for their own, I agree with you completely, their own huge blind spot, which is the trivialization of the contributions of the Black freedom struggle. Like, not only do I think did we make that severance with the white left, but yeah, in a city that deals so much with music, where like, for example, I think Marshall Allen is a musical icon in the city. For followers of jazz or not, like, he is an icon to the older generation and the younger generation. Like, we also put a stake in the ground for like lovers of music or musical organizations in the city to contend with, and also like Black misleadership. Let's say something like abolition school. They would not be able to make a pure defense of this music, or a defense of this music as a project that was pure, or these people as like basically living heroes or heroic geniuses who, as you had said, had an unwavering commitment to beauty and who possessed great courage and the capacity for great sacrifice. And I think what I appreciate about the event, well, I just wanted to bring out a few things from our planning process. Where from the very beginning, like you had asserted, like, this is music that cries out to be ideologically defined. And then you had also said something, which is, I think we should plan it on a short timeline, and I don't think we have to kill ourselves. Like, you made it very plain in a way that was new, and that's something that I'm still trying to make sense of and still trying to learn from. And something that I do think that was important was that we just tried to lift up everything that was pure about this music. It's not that we went in with an agenda. Like, we wanted to learn from the music and we wanted to learn from the musicians. And the more we learned from them, the more it changed us. And I think it also purified our work, or it purified our task as free school. And yeah, for like the names of these musicians or composers that are so recognizable in the city, I don't think any group that would naturally take up this music, be it Ars Nova or Asian Arts Initiative or Abolition School, none of them could hold a candle to like even just this plain, you know, dignifying of the music
Mhm.
and the musical legacy that we tried to make. And I think that says something about who we are and also where we're headed.
I can say a few things. I think I was this might not come in the order that needs to because I feel like I'm also swimming with thoughts, but also kind of also like awakened again by what you're saying and also what you've started. But I think something that came back to me through a process of reflecting on the symposium and what it meant to really study and honor, these musicians and their lives and their sacrifices and contribution is that I think we also have been thinking about this for a while in free school, but even this gift that this music offers to all humanity, but also even like because we have been thinking so much about this all humanity struggle, about what the shape of what this will have to look like, the shape of struggle to come has to encompass all humanity, which is still something I think we're still thinking through, but I think in all its like constitutions and what we mean by civilizational and what we mean by Afro-Asiatic, I think it's all there. But it's also, of course, the foundation of an American civilization or a shape for the people who, in a time like now, so desperately need a new worldview and prepare themselves to be part of the making of a new world. They need this music. And if the musicians then at the beginning of the 20th century, where they felt so urgently this necessity coming out of Reconstruction, coming out of the betrayal of Reconstruction, coming out of the shadow of slavery, and felt this necessity for a new consciousness, like a new consciousness shaped by, like what this betrayal of a promise of freedom meant, but also anticipating what the shape of the 20th and the 21st century struggle against white supremacy would have to look like. Then this music was necessary. And the shape of the music that it took, but even the philosophical heights and the fact that I think it did help to concretize what we had been talking so much about in terms of this new movement of world thought originated by Du Bois, but also to be able to find its companion in the music, but even to take up this realm of beauty and aesthetic was something I found to be really important. I think it was it wait. Okay, wait.
As you all talk, it's making more sense for the science conference.
That's also something I was
keep
gonna
talking,
reflect on.
don't stop now.
No, I think it's also why I think Duke was so foundational, why we took our time to, go through those sections that we had laid out, like Harlem, the new aesthetic, Black beauty, but then also the Afro-Asiatic reconstitution of humanity. And I'm still trying to find the words to describe how we framed, or like best way to describe what the river and the Alvin Ailey jazz ballet and the Three Black Kings suite,
I'm sorry.
Duke's final work. But I feel like it is evidence of like when that like reconstitution is completed or the mountaintop is reached, what is humanity capable of? And also what will that sound, that music, that dance, that art, but that imaginary look like? And it was just really breathtaking. I think we were all teary-eyed like watching it because it was just so much beauty. And then I also just really want to agree that like learning about the musicians, especially even Mingus, like the kind of courage and integrity that he held on to, I think gave us a lot of like also like courage to be able to take this I think it is something that I do feel as if is evidence that I don't feel that I'm the same person anymore if I had to take what it was that they gave up, but also held on to in the way in which, like, I just can't stop thinking about the way that, Mingus was so punished in his life for daring to dream and to love and to have, to want to give the world and children in particular so much beauty. in a world full of noise and ugliness and hatred and white supremacy. And it is something that I feel like we, can say that we all owe a little something to these musicians because of what it is that, they've given us in terms of our ability to even dream and love and imagine. And I think actually there was a lot of, for me, I was thinking again about the conversation that I think you had brought up, Shamar, about like, what does it mean for these musicians if we are to really take them seriously as revolutionaries in every sense of word? And it like, it kind of clicked in terms of like, well, if what we're saying is that these musicians are revolutionaries and there's something artistic about the revolutionary process, and what does that say about what we mean by revolutionary? And I think that was something that we like full-throatedly made it like, clarified in terms of what it is that the relationship of this music, but also what these musicians can show us about what it means to have this allegiance to the people and allegiance to even trying to like, create a new world for the children and to be able to be embodiments of a world that has not yet come but must come. And it is something that I remember, like, I think we had really, I think there's something that we came to really find in terms of seeing ourselves, but even seeing the revolutionary process as it unfolds in the arena of music, but also art and struggle and freedom. And it is something that I agree with what you're saying about the white left and also what has happened to even the word revolutionary that I think has so like debased it that makes it sometimes hard to even have a conversation about these musicians of revolutions, because we have to make this firm distinction between when the word revolution is invoked, but not for such pure purposes. And I think it is something that we ended up reflecting also on this conference in the Lucian Blackwell reading group on Tuesday. And it was nice to have people who had attended the symposium, even people like John who attended both days, but even people who hadn't come. And I think something that we were talking about was just how, I think it became a very existential question actually, because we had I think the one thing that I feel that I like when you said that, I wished that I expressed this, maybe even disappointment that there were some things that I wish we could have covered more, had a little more time for in the symposium.
Could you say what they were?
Oh yeah. I was just going to say that it ended up being that the conversation at Lucian Blackwell was a really natural place to, I think, actually have that conversation, actually even for us to have time to process the symposium and actually have that conversation with people about the state of music since the time of these musicians that we were talking about, and how in some ways we would trace like Duke, Mingus, Sun Ra, and even like the very specific iteration of funk that takes up Sun Ra, as probably the last time in which music had a principal relationship to the people before it just becomes completely distorted and broken or twisted by the music industry, and then the rise of something so insidious as what we see today is this phenomenon of hip hop, but even also accompanying it ideologies of postmodernism and nihilism. And so I think it was something that that was the one thing I wanted to say if we had time for, or perhaps I could have said it sooner in the midst of the second day, in terms of why it was that I felt like that we did feel like it is true that when we say we've reached Sun Ra marks an end and a beginning to to a stage of music, but also thought, but also the necessity to take up that leading edge of struggle through music is something like it has been very difficult. It has not been afforded to the generation since that time, I think. And I feel like what we were talking about was just how there are narratives that will say that funk is like a progenitor to hip hop
Mhm.
because of the way in which early hip hop samples those, funk records and uses perhaps the percussion elements of the one to create, the beats, the early beats that like shape hip hop and whatnot in the, I don't know, the late 70s and these block parties in the Bronx. You know the story, and it's like meant to be something that, Black people do feel like, oh, it feels like a triumph. It feels like something was created from nothing. But when you do look at hip hop today, the fact that it just created such a strong like culture of death that consumes, it's, we were talking about the story, the story of that positive rapper in Philadelphia who's 30 years old, has had 2 kids or something, and was on his way to his mother's house before he was shot on Mother's Day. And it was, there couldn't have been for me like a better or like a stronger encapsulation of what, the exhaustion of hip hop and what it really represents to young generation or even to 2 generations than that, which is really heartbreaking. And I feel that it is something that we had to also, say that the natural conclusion, as some narratives will really have you like try to believe like the next stage of of Black music is hip hop, but it's taken such a different path, and I think it is really clear that there is something to return to in the project. That many, I guess, people who either defend or create conscious hip hop, like is the project to really try to redeem this music given everything, or is there something really important to return to, and to rediscover, to recapture as a revolutionary spirit? I think
Are you then saying to recapture the revolutionary spirit, you cannot go back to hip hop. You have to go back before hip hop.
Okay, yeah, that's a better way of putting it.
Okay,
Yeah,
I agree with that.
And as we were talking, it's something about what we were saying through like Sun Ra, and even what we were saying about why it made sense. It like finally clicked in my own head, like some of the decisions we made to talk about his like scathing critique of musicians, but also alongside his concern about nuclear war and also white supremacy click, because I feel like Sun Ra did really believe that the responsibility of the musician was to awaken the spiritually dead inhabitants of this earth and prepare them for something new.
Yeah.
But if musicians, as we see them today, and I guess he was kind of prophetic about it, instead in a time where even nuclear war is even more of a possibility, and like white supremacy is not a battle yet won. But if music today prepares people to accept that there's nothing about this world that can be redeemed, then instead, if you were so angry and so indignant or so fed up with the world, it's not that hard of a leap for a lot of, even I've noticed like the message of a lot of hip hop artists is just, well, let's end it on, burn baby burn, like that kind of message where people are really prepared if like nuclear war does break out to just accept it. I thought that it was really actually important to actually link these questions of what it actually means to, like this question of peace actually, and a question of future, and a question of life itself, like what does it really mean versus this culture of death, this culture of nihilism that it like hip hop really actually kind of prepares this whole generation to so readily absorb, and so. It's just like only after the fact you sometimes kind of realize the decisions you make lead you to larger conclusions like this. But yeah, I also am really excited for all of these ideas to be continued in the science conference, like very, very much, because it seems that we're not yet done investigating what like Sun Ra meant by the myth science of his orchestra, among its many, many names. And then also I started reflecting on this morning about how actually Afrofuturism is also something that continues to be an iteration of postmodernism, but even in the realm of science, or even the role Black folk have played to actually create a science of freedom, and to be able to actually imagine a world where it's not really about the conquest or the technological or military like domination of the cosmos, but actually a resolution of like even human problems, human contradictions, peace within and without, like all of these, this kind of cosmology or even this worldview that Sun Ra lays out, I think is something that's so vast. But as soon as you put the, like, as you were saying, put the word Afrofuturism on it, it just like boxes it in, and it creates this sensation that basically becomes, oh yeah.
I mean, I hate to, could you just, I was listening, I didn't get it. The sentence right before the one you just said, you said something.
The resolution of
Get a resolution.
Oh, well, that's what I think the question of space has really meant, like, and also an inner space, that the inner void, the inner, like also what Baldwin talks about in terms of in the creative process essay, which actually came back to a lot of us as we were studying these musicians. Like, the task of the artist is actually not just to build dams or to drive buses, but to understand and subdue the inner wilderness of within. And I feel like that's something that's very, that, you know, before, like, I'll agree with the sentiment that I feel like others in preschool had expressed. What did that mean? It was how I always read it. But then now I think there's something more and more concrete about, like, actually taking up Sun Ra as one of our, like, great teachers in this regard. But I really think that we, like, I was just reflecting again about how for apparently like a year and a half, like at the National Museum of African American Heritage and Culture, you could walk into a whole floor dedicated to Afrofuturism, and you were just greeted with like image after image of Sun Ra as like a pioneer. And that's how like a lot of people do know Sun Ra, Afrofuturist, like, and it is like, you can't really go to even a basic page on him without finding this word. And it is also, I think, a way that it is a front, I think, that has to continue to be taken up in terms of this question of science and what it actually means in terms of creating a, like, okay, now you're disrespecting me, I'm sorry. But like, I just think it's a way to make this vast imaginary, this Black proletariat imaginary, comprehensible, but also compatible with like a white imaginary, or white academic sense of and framework. And it's just, and it's just for someone like Sun Ra, who would never have wanted for his vision to be like closed like this. I think it's like the crime of crimes, personally. But yeah, I just wanted to also lift up something that we've been saying through the effort of the music symposium. It's really listening to these lives, to the lives, the evidence of the lives.
May I ask you a question? You know, remember you were saying this morning that there's evidence of Sun Ra being in Chicago and in some ways being influenced by the Nation of Islam. You know, and I think that, you know, when you think about the mothership and all of this thing, so would they call the Honorable Elijah Muhammad an Afrofuturist?
Actually,
not, but I would say not. But it shows the moral and ethical inconsistency. They think they can appropriate Sun Ra, but when it comes to the Nation of Islam, you know, where they proclaim that the white man is the devil, you know, it's a whole nother ball of wax. And then, of course, because the academy is so dominated by Jewish and Zionists, that, and Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam have been branded by them as anti-Semitic, so it's too much to swallow. But anyway,
no, I think you're right. I think you're right. I have noticed that, you know, there are a lot of like academic musings on Afrofuturism and like Black folks' preoccupation with space, or like, you know, UFOs, and they'll mention, you know, the Nation of Islam, but it's not as if they'll mention it, but it's not as if they'll be like, oh, but the pioneer of like of all of this is yeah. I had more to say, but I think
sorry I interrupted you.
Wait, can I add one?
Yeah. And then circle.
Oh, no, I just also wanted to say that I I think the achievement of our study of the music or our deepening relationship to the music is, I think it clarifies like certain unfinished tasks that the Third American Revolution left open. And I actually think that we have clear gains in that direction, especially this thing between like the cleavage between the mind and the heart. The mind and the heart, that is a hangover from European modernity that has compounded with the development of the white supremacist social system in an unhealthy way, in a way that has damaged like the psyche or the souls of the American people. But basically the lag between the material versus the inner, the spiritual and the moral. I think the music is an antidote. It stands to be free. That's all.
Yeah, I also was like on my edge of my seat, Kathy, when you were talking, because sometimes when you put things together, they're very clarifying. And like, because the question is like, why were these three composers, or why was the even choices of the musicians that we picked, why were they revolutionaries? And when you were talking about the Black proletariat imaginary, meaning like, so in juxtaposition, I was also reflecting about why I was like annoyed at the first half of the day on Duke, and why Duke was such a difficult artist to explain. And like that kind of answers like a piece of that question for me, even though like same with Michelle, I'm still like trying to think through or process what we did. But I felt like Duke Ellington was a little bit of a difficulty because, or at least, you know, it seemed like we had to kind of get through that a little bit. Because how is Duke seen as a revolutionary? And like all of the assumptions about Black people were kind of put on the table in a way that, you know, we had to discuss through. Like so from where does Duke Ellington come from? And a large point that I found important to say in the symposium was that this was music from a people, Black people, and that they all come from Black people. And like the people is like, it was really important for me to say that this is where the music comes from, this is where the imaginary comes from, the striving, the, you know, like the science or like all of that. And so like, I appreciated that you said that. And then the other thing I'm also reflecting from what you're saying, Doc, is the need to be on a more of an ideological offensive that came into my mind because of it just I'm trying to explain why. I think that the symposium, it's true, we're not dealing with white leftists, and we really never intended to. And a part of that is also why. Like, what is the concern that free school, so-called this thing called free school that everybody wants to, you know, or in a way, like, in the same vein of Sun Ra being amongst the people, free school is amongst the people having a discussion. And I appreciate that, you know, you brought up that Lucian Blackwell conversation. I didn't know. But like, so how is it that free school is doing a symposium on these musicians and it's revolutionary instead of dealing with Kant or the 19th century thinkers or epistemology that either dates itself or originates from this worldview that does not include the Third American Revolution, the anti-slavery movement, or what you said, the defeat of Black Reconstruction, like all those, like the entire history that like not only have we studied, but we have become to know or become to be a part of. It's in our veins. It's what we find to express any emotion or behavior. That's where our songs come from. That's where our language comes from. That's how we relate to the world, like all of us, you know? Like, how is it that this group of people in this conjunction of individuals are celebrating these figures? And that's why I think that having to do, or the question about the ideological offensive is kind of like a little bit more sharpened for me due to the importance of the music symposium, and also why I was so upset with the first half of the Duke Ellington
But explain
day.
that again. I never got it clear.
No,
Why
because
you upset?
I'm also like, okay, so another thing that Kathy had brought up is the nihilism of the culture today.
Yes.
And that brings up a question. How did we get to this culture? How did we get to this culture?
How do we get to this culture?
This culture that we're living among now, especially studying, or especially thinking about the context where Sun Ra, Mingus, and Duke Ellington spring from. How is it possible that we are at this moment in history? And why was it so difficult to get through Duke Ellington? Or why was it so difficult to say that Duke Ellington was a revolutionary, or that Black people are revolutionary people, and able to create a worldview of art, a vision of the future, a way of behavior, a way of operating against white supremacy that the world has not seen and has not yet been able to understand and can learn from through not only the music, but the science. How is it possible? And like, and meaning like, why is it now 3 or 2 or 4, depending on the, you know, rate of birth, you know, in Black people, generations later, are we living in a culture today? And what is that culture? And, you know, like, can we fight through this culture? What is the struggle that the culture, that we need to take through culture? Or not, and what I'm saying is not just in essence having to do with like sound frequencies and art, whatever. I'm talking about in what way can we arrive at a new culture? And in this symposium, we're also suggesting that there is a way that this new culture can spring from. The basis of it is from Sun Ra, Duke Ellington, and Charles Mingus. And that's why I thought it was interesting that that part on Duke Ellington was difficult, and why also it was frustrating me, because we are living in such a time where we need Duke Ellington, Sun Ra, and Charles Mingus, and we're not given it. You know, like you had said, children are not being taught. Why aren't children being taught real music? Why aren't children being taught real thought, real ways of thinking? Why aren't children being, you know, and like, so, and like you had said, with that person who had gotten shot on the way to his mom's house, who's a father, you know, like, why is it possible for that to be so normalized?
Yeah.
Why is it possible for that child to die, for that man to die? Why can't he raise his kids? And you know, like the situation or like the crisis or the way that we're living in, the city is not a safe, or like whatever, you know, so why can't it be? And I think that the music symposium, or like what's on the table about the music symposium and the political imperative of the music symposium, also has to do with like that, we're dealing with that real human crisis of consciousness and the moral fabric of society. And I think that's a very serious matter to take very seriously, which is what I think free school has been doing, and it has been, it's like a healing thing. That's why when we talked about, or when Alice had brought it up during the event, like the music is healing. Why is the music healing? And why is the music that we're given now not healing? Why is the music we're given now killing me? Like, why is it hurting me? And why are we making such an attempt to work through something that's hurting me? Or how are we trying to change this culture? You know, so, but, and you know, the frustration that I also have with musicians and artists, obviously, is like, you know, apparent, because those are the people who are responsible for also either helping a white supremacist state hurt the people or able to heal the people. And the judge, like, you are supposed to heal. You are supposed to be able to bring beauty and understanding. You are supposed to heighten consciousness. And like another word that was on my mind really was enlightenment. Like, you know, and it seemed like that is a impulse or something that is very inspiring, that the people can also, that the people need enlightenment. It's like enlightenment. And it doesn't mean that we are in a dark, tragic landscape that people aren't able to think and things like that. But it'll be beautiful if you see an enlightened person or people that are able to strive for enlightenment at a time where we're put in a situation that is supposed to be dark, or that our ceiling is so low that we can't think beyond our own, you know, own, it's just a little bit difficult. It's just a little bit difficult to find where the water comes from and be able to be in bloom because of it. So it's kind of like we were like, you know, trying to bring water to a desert in a way. And that's why I hear what you're saying, Kathy, and I really appreciate you saying it like that, because I think that the concern of the Music Symposium has to do with the future and in a very serious way. Yeah.
If you don't mind, still, just what was the difficulty with the first part of Ellington?
I just had thought, and maybe I was wrong with my
No.
because maybe I misunderstood the question at hand, but it was that question of if Duke Ellington was a self-conscious revolutionary.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we had that discussion about why, and I'm like, well, why is it that Duke Ellington needs to be questioned upon his relative understanding about society and history and his family and the world and the music that he's, why does he get to be questioned? Why don't you get to be questioned? You're like, you know what I'm saying? But that's my attitude, because I have attitude and I don't mean to.
No, you don't.
But like,
I mean, yes, you do. But I think, to me, it's a very relevant question. Even going forward to the science conference. But I think, you know, the thing that gives a revolutionary essence to Ellington is the same thing that gives a revolutionary essence to Baldwin. Only when you get that chronology right. Emancipation of 4 million Black proletariats, Reconstruction and its defeat. It all starts there. And without that consciousness, you know what I'm saying? That's what I was. And so Ellington, his whole life is just like Baldwin, is tethered to that. Tethered the right way. Yeah. And so it is with Mingus and Sun Ra. And so, you know, one of the things we're trying to get, and I guess I'll talk about it, is that liberatory epistemology. We're trying to work this out, but I think we go back to the same thing. Emancipation, Reconstruction. And, you know, the Du Bois question, the new moment of thought. I think we're on to something, how do you say, without which all thought withers and dies. There can be no music without that recognition. And the heroic thing with Ellington and all is that they understood it. They saw the problem of the 20th century, the problem of, and they were working in musical terms and narrative terms to solve the problem of the 20th century.
yes, actually.
So, and that, I would agree with you, since Ellington is such an originary, and Sun Ra and Mingus acknowledge their deep debt to Ellington, as well as others, of course. But was it just music that they were indebted to, or was it his consciousness and his vision, and what music, to be purposeful, must achieve?
Right.
Yes, that's all. Go ahead, man, and then.
Good to see everybody.
Yeah, good to see you, man.
And I have to answer that question.
Okay, just speak up a little louder.
Good to see everybody
Yeah.
this morning. And I have to answer the question that you asked me about who used to come.
The friend that used to come.
I have to answer the question.
Oh, yeah, thank you, so, okay. Yeah, about Tracy, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. What you've expressed, I
Mm.
believe, is
Oh, shit.
something very profound about just our existence and our struggle in life. And you are grappling with what does anything do? What does anything that we do mean? And what should it be? I mean, that's what I'm taking from you. I do want to raise the question of contradiction. It is a contradiction to me. Saying that Ellington's insistence on his own way to do things, because there was other music around him, is in a way an answer to the question about was he revolutionary. Now, it still doesn't tell me that he said in a corner and said, I am a revolutionary, but the fact that when you study music, look at certain things, you see that these things are new. The contradiction. The Ellington said that Paul Whiteman dressed jazzed up and made it a lady. That's a folk melody. Well, hey, I got to that's problematic for a post for a 60s person like me. You, it's got to be. Dress it up, made it a lady. What's he saying? Well, I know that he's saying in relationship of his music, say to New York ensemble, strictly from a musicological point of view. We're not talking about other things. You know, everything, things, the titles of the music, the involvement with the larger group, reconstituting the world, all of it that you said, I think, is spot on. I thought of it. I do have another question about possible contradictions. You use words combined. His question, I don't know if he's consciously the question to do symphonic music, because that to me is also from the point of view of if you are doing a musical form that is in its very origin, it might be Western, but it is non-European, then why would you constantly, I mean, I don't see a necessity to call this long form symphonic.
Okay,
I see a necessity for new language.
true that.
Okay? And that even to some things that I do in relationship to certain anthropological. You know, there's a point about how you think about things, whether you define them or whether you describe them. You know, you start defining things, and I forget someone said something here. If you describe something as having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 characteristics, what happens when you find something that doesn't have those 5 characteristics? How do you break? What is your theory underneath to allow you to break? So, back to the music. Right now, we have people playing all of the, what they want to call them, ethics styles. They but they also coexisted with all of the original players. So Duke Ellington is playing and Cannonball Adams is playing soul and it's hard rock, you know, and Mobley and Barkley. And Cecil Taylor is doing his experiments with his self-consciously saying, I reject the notion of the standard scale on the piano. That's revolutionary. It is revolutionary, particularly in musicological terms. I don't know how Cecil sees himself, you know, civil rights movement. I don't know what he did. We know that Duke supported people in the civil rights. I don't know what she did, but I know that.
Like he literally had a conversation with King. Like,
Musician,
he literally.
when he said, why did I scale this way? Scale this? I can make up my own scale. That's who? That's big stuff. And he said, I don't have to do it this way. Which is the blues, but not blues. It's a blues, but different. But then if you listen to Northeast Mississippi blues from Mississippi played on guitar, two chords, and you hear what it's about, you see the ornament is right out of that. Sonically, it makes sense because we're talking about different musical language that people are working, and their vocabulary. See, that's we were struggling when we talked. He's using that, even though he may know he was thrown out of Howard University for playing jazz. He wanted to be an aeronautical engineer. His father said he's going to hire you. Just so happens he was good enough to be a musician. Thank the world for small things. But, and then, what about the musicians who were quote unquote conscious revolutionary in the 60s when Gary Barnes, Gary Barnes, and then others who say this is black community and we are different. Even John Lewis, we're artists. We refuse to play in that museum. That's sometimes the way that originally meant the question, but I now negate myself and I say that the question is not so important. Once you understand that the material, the non materials that are used to construct the come from a different place. They come from whether he self-consciously grabs them. I didn't say this, but I'm going to say it. Unlike the George Gershwin who goes with those people and does a great shot. That is the you see, you can't take that away. He did that. He did that. And there were people listening to this is on the phone. There were people in Washington, D.C. loving to do it. Who would never go in the hang out my folks down there. They would say, no. Do what? No. I mean, this is the thing, here we are.
Me.
Well, this is the thing last week. You have to be careful. Here, I just wanted to say finally that the whole issue of films, you talk about hip hop song, done by black kids in Cleveland and other places in their garages. White folks say this is strange. They're not interested initially. Then they see these independent record labels making money. Then all of a sudden they go out. Exactly what you all have said. Exactly. Then it gets so big, so commercialized that the decadence of industry, as we're witnessing now in the people get into all that they know that grandmother. And I have to say it that way. I have to say it for those of us who are Asian, those of us who are African American. That's what I mean when I say it. Dancing with your grandmother, not cool. So it's boom, period. And that's it. And the issue of music changing, very interesting. Like I said, simultaneously, pick a year, 65. Coltrane is still alive. He's playing, and he's been through his personal phases. Everything from hard to hardcore bebop. All of that's said. Cannonball Adams, Cecil, Duke Ellington, big folks and fine churches, but he can still play Take the A Train. That's dance music. I'm sorry. So my parents, who did partner dancing, 6 times playing dance, they would go. But they would go to the dances and the kids, of course, the music was being played, rhythm and blues, but they were doing swing dances. They learned to big band. So all of this is coexisting simultaneously. So now we come to now, and what Sister Bill said here, and you too, you pointed out, it's not all simultaneous. I mean, we have to go to you have to go to the Smithsonian Jazz or the Lincoln Center, and you hear people play Ellington long form pieces. I don't know how often that high school band, and there are some, you can go to school for the arts in DC, has a program. I don't know how often the kids get to play to appreciate it. Even today, I have no idea. Maybe you do. I don't know if your research carried you out ethnographically to that level of detail, to understand what the kids. So,
Let me let him come in.
it is very important to struggle with these things.
That's right.
Yeah.
We'll come back around. Go ahead, man. What's your name again?
August.
August, yeah.
There's a Stokely Carmichael quote that stuck with me. And he said the first need of a free people is to define their own terms. Which means that the narrative that you've been living on is a paradigm that's locked you in. This is where, and the music has always been in this American story and the African American expression. It has done what we couldn't do with guns. It is because it is violent, because it has to be. Blues, people think blues is, oh, I'm down. Yeah, but if I got my hands on what I wanted, then this would not be the same narrative. The music is revolution. For my personal taste was the 40s, 50s shift into bebop. That it just blew everything out the water. And so in order to talk about revolution, to talk about music, communication, narratives, the paradigm set, and we talk about white supremacy. White supremacy is not American. The Vatican divided up the whole world under the doctrine of discovery. It's white supremacy, long before America existed. Okay, the Crusades, long before America was white supremacy. If you were not white Christian, you had no soul, and your land, you and everything else was subject to their whims, which basically meant conquest and death. As far as who and whether Ellington did this, I really believe everybody had to deal with what they would had. As he said, Ellington was not. You're absolutely right. Those Bootsy people from Washington D.C. would not be involved with the Geetsies from the thing. Ellington is famous. The brown paper bag test. So who was going to dance in Ellington's band? There were no dark-skinned women dancing with Ellington. There's in Black America has been always this total insanity, but it's just because there's not another narrative.
Wait,
There was a saying on several plantations, the standing joke, because out in the field and in the house, all these people that look like the master. And that's because of rape. And I'm stay with you. I'll get back to the music, but I'll come back in a second. It's the fact that the dominant. I tried to explain to one of my friends who had no clue about what slavery is and what mindset is. And from a male testosterone alpha male world, could you imagine having an ATM and a bordello in your backyard?
I don't get it.
Meaning you making free money and all the sex you could possibly want is in your backyard. And there's a reason you don't get it. And I say this with love. Testosterone is a monster. I'm gonna jump from the foul line and 360 dunk. I'm gonna kill it. We see it in sports. That aggression, again, like the music, is a transformation because it's war. When you listen to sports, the golf match is going on right now. If you listen to them, they talk in terms of war and conquest and winning and beating people. This is the human, when we're talking about this is the part of the human condition. And so when the beta male and the oppressed cannot express themselves to straight up frontal assault in competition, that goes out another way. And that expression in the music, in the sports. What I watch golf. I played twice, and there's not a black golfer out there. Despite Tiger Woods' eminence, there's not another black golfer out there. It's not that but that's what depression does. If my father and grandfather couldn't play golf, then you expect this to show up? No. But that's why the Tigers' dominance is really no different from Michael Jackson's dominance, the bebop players. When you listen to what Chucky was, yes, yes, it was. All of these people knew that they were capable of much more, but every door is closed. What you just said, I want to be an engineer, but those ideas get squashed right from day one. So being able to go back to my original statement, to define your own terms, to express yourself only in the space, that's the pressure that brings all of this out. Because I can't go into architecture, a civil engineer. Yeah, again, one of the constant conversations with my liberal white friends that don't get it. I said, look around this room, the wood, the stained glass, this table, the color, which one of these, anything in here, in this room, not the world, just this room, is designed by a black company. The television, the wood, the brass, nothing, zero. And so when that is the pressure, that there's so other many ways for us to be, but nothing. And when you asked also about the rap music, it's been said multiple times, the rap artists can talk about shooting each other, but can they talk about shooting the white oppression?
Well, sometimes.
And that doesn't last very long. It doesn't get much happier. Because Ice Cube did it for 5 seconds, and Ice-T did, I should say, long time ago. And that was the end of that conversation. It shut him right down. And so there sometimes, I mean, we know it, but there is a constant. White supremacy is a nice word, but it is actually just the enemy. It is the enemy of self-expression, of self-human potential. And this is a constant thing. So anytime we go, why does this happen? Why does nihilism happen? It's because somebody does not want you. It's okay if a group of black guys play and they call themselves a Lakers. But if a group of black guys with Apple computer, if we did the Apple to tech what we've done to sports, this is a game changer.
May I ask you a question?
Sure.
Is your argument predicated upon an assumption that progress is determined by technology?
No, progress is about ideas and aspirations.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
My point. Let me just say.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
You see what I'm saying? Because was it Ellington that wanted to be a civil engineer? Is that? Yeah.
Well, he went to be.
Or Fletcher Henderson, who was also a chemist.
Like,
But the thing is, they made a greater contribution.
with,
Well, they made you say great, but that's the other door was closed. And let me add one more thing.
I don't think it was
We
like
look at one of the
I
things
don't
about
think it was
music.
like that.
But watch this. One of the things about music as a pianist, you get your mentors, you get the great instructors, and we hear your voice on that piano. But no scientist, not Einstein, not anybody occupies it. That is a collective. Germany, when Einstein was, he wasn't the only smart guy. There was a bunch of, there was a collective attitude, and it's the same attitude we see in jazz because they riffing with each other, they communicate. And so when scientists do that, one person.
Let Serafina come back.
Yeah, but that's,
Because
it's not
I'm sorry,
individual. August.
you said August. Yeah, sorry. I don't know how you came to free school. Did you hear about it like online or anything?
I found Charlie Mingus, and I was digging on Mingus, and I hit this
So
button, and YouTube said, "Who?
Said,
What?
did
I've
you
never heard of you all."
did you just start digging Charles Mingus?
I'm 65 years old.
I'm 26.
No,
I'm wondering.
I'm saying I'm 65 because no, I'm not new. This is nothing.
So you were just like kind of revisiting. How did you first get to Mingus?
I'm 20. That's what I'm saying. This
Yeah.
this is. I mean, let me.
The only reason why I was
Yeah,
asking
go ahead.
where you were coming from is because I didn't want to assume that I knew more or anything.
No.
But the only thing I did want to suggest
Mhm.
though is and I apologize, I don't know the details because I'm not as smart as my friends here at the table. But I do know that like Duke Ellington was respected by so many people. And there was an interaction or a couple of instances of where King would have met or had different like kind of interactions with Duke Ellington. And from just a brief overview, I do remember that there was a lot of respect that Martin Luther King or had given to Duke Ellington. Maybe it was in the biography, or I forget. Maybe somebody else could mention. I don't know. But the reason why I bring that up is because this whole revolutionary thing and like, well, what makes a revolutionary? Is it just because they say that they are discovering more about Africa or that they are discovering more about philosophy or ideology? And I wanted to make that point because the respect that King was giving to Duke, I think, shows about the consciousness of Duke. But then I also want to say that, the thing that we were doing with the music symposium was that musicians kind of get forgotten, or people forget sometimes that musicians are people. So I actually really appreciate the interjections about how, Duke wanted to be a civil engineer, that Fletcher was a chemist, or even, and I didn't even get to Sun Ra and his archaeological and like his entire body of world knowledge and, how many dimensions that kind of covered through either science, physics, and with physics, it becomes with like light and sound, or even history, and like we had, or Jeremiah was bringing up during the symposium, language, the way that he would read either the Bible or old texts, or the esoteric knowledge, like the roundness of Sun Ra as a thinker, I think is really profound to me. And sometimes people forget that musicians are human beings. And what really is interesting about that is because it's very easy to explain the musicians by the music. Oh yeah, like they made this, and the way that they did this was explaining how they thought. But actually, it kind of is also the opposite that explains how the music was made. Meaning, whatever comes in also comes out, and whatever comes out also goes back in. And so, the spiritual and intellectual journeys that, like, the three men in specific that we were studying, also played so much of a role into the development of their own consciousness and what they will then stand for or even talk about. Like Charles Mingus, he would not, saying, back down from saying about the music industry or anything like that, or about the world situation, or even like Kathy was saying earlier about how little we went through about the nuclear war point. Because Sun Ra, I would, that investigation I would need to do more so of, because of how he knew about the science behind nuclear fission or atoms or, particle physics and things like that. I would assume that all of that would be in the argument to why nuclear war was an anti-human, not only experiment, but something that is not, to be done. And like, another thing about Sunrise, like, the thing about musicians not taking that responsibility and like making sounds that they don't know of, And I think we had raised that point also in the symposium. Yeah, he was like, if you make sounds and you're not sure what the sounds are, then they are harmful to people. And like, so it becomes different kinds of questions. And, even when Mayoshi was talking so much about Sun Ra, she was not saying that Sun Ra was playing 24 hours of the day, which is done sometimes. She was also saying that Sun Ra was lecturing 24 hours a day because he was always talking, or even with Ransom, talking maybe to the point when he picked up the phone and then he continued the same or a similar conversation. So I'm just saying, like, the human being or the person that these men were is also a profound thing for me. And it explains so much about the revolutionary question rather than
This is very interesting.
a dogmatic approach at looking at
Oh.
what maybe white people have said about light-skinned people and black, what I'm saying? Like, that's because I just think
I have a
that
question for you.
I know, but it's just like to wash over.
I think you've missed my point, and I think there's a maybe.
Okay.
Again, this question is there's no adversary. When Ellington played at the Cotton, and throughout African American history, there has been a light skin, dark skin. There's a classism in the black community. Light versus dark. I know I ain't talking about mine, but the people that look African, there's been a rejection of African for the European in the black community alone. When I mentioned Ellington, his dancers at the Cotton Club needed to be light skinned.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know if you know that fact. This is not my opinion of Ellington. That's the fact. So it was not so much me saying
I just said
Ellington.
the women dancers.
The women dancers.
Because the male dancers. So it's I agree with what you're saying.
Right.
And only white people could come in.
Right.
And that was the 1920s. And that was.
So this is not my opinion of Ellington as a man.
Go back to this. Okay, well, go ahead. I'll let go. Go ahead, Eddie. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Let them come over here. Well, go ahead, Eddie.
I mean, without nitpicking the life of any artist, composer, revolutionary for any mistakes they might have made or things that hadn't completed, I think it's very clear to me that we're able to assert a revolutionary criteria for an act of love that is worthy of the people, that will be able to elevate our people and make a future worthy of the children. And I won't necessarily make assumptions about you, but I mean, I think even when I just talk to friends in my personal life, when making these assertions and even having a moral standard, at least I notice a tendency that folks feel diminished, even say, "Oh wow, my life is not of great value. I am not doing anything worthwhile, and I have less value as a person." And I don't think that's not at all the takeaway or the conclusion that we're trying to make when asserting this revolutionary criteria for music and purpose and struggle. It is an opening up a path for the future that we believe everyone can walk with us and even make a contribution, young, old. And so, I mean, until we're dead, it's never too late. So, I don't want to make this discussion about looking for the faults or the mishaps or the things that were left unfinished for all these artists or revolutionaries, because I think that loses the whole purpose of the symposium and really closes the door on the future of a lot of young people who are grappling with these questions that we're putting on the table every day of their lives.
Emily.
Oh yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Opened a whole I
Yeah,
feel like
it's
everyone's really
like
excited to talk, which is good. But yeah, to me, actually, the question that you originally raised at the event, and I think it was built upon in different ways. To me, it showed the success of the actual putting together of the event in the sense that for us even now to have a conversation over what does this music mean and why does it matter is successful. To even say that music, one, it's our acceptance of one, and this actually goes against my prior assumptions of music, because I always feel like I didn't grow up with like necessarily good music at all. In fact, I don't even think I grew up with music, because my parents were like brought up in the Cultural Revolution in China, and like they never really showed me music except like maybe opera or something. But and then the music they forced me to play when I took piano.
Chinese opera or?
No, like white opera. which honestly I kind of like to a certain. I think there is beauty to it, but my point is one is our acceptance and my acceptance, which is new, that music is not just sound, but music is not just sound, and it's not just sound for, especially today, corporate entertainment or escapism, but actually music is almost like it's a fierce expression or language of something else. Like someone like Ellington, Mingus, Sun Ra, and there are many, many more who are like busting at the seams to find a way to express a worldview, and a worldview that is like fully defined by basically freedom, completeness that has not yet been achieved, especially by like their people. And the second, I think, huge achievement of like even our conversation, or an assumption that I feel like we've had to basically assert, is that we all agree that like one, music is not just sounds, it's not just technicalities, but actually the music and the way it's put together and the what it expresses is also, it has to have a vision, like it has to have a worldview. And the question is, where is that worldview or vision coming from? And for someone like Duke, the reason why, to me, I actually thought the most successful, to me, I was actually most touched by the Duke program of the event. And this is coming from someone who, one, I like, my preference of all four, not that it's about preferences, is my preference is like Mingus. And it's because, I mean, I just really dig, like, I dig his complexity and the way he is kind of basically a little angry. Yeah, he's bad, like, and he's bad. And also he's like just a little crazy enough. And that's the little craziness that I feel like I feel and you feel, we all feel, because we live in an unjust society. And that's Mingus, but I have to say in the whole program, like, and Sunra is becoming a favorite of mine because Free School talks about Sunra so damn. Yeah, because everyone loves Sunra, so I have to love Sunra. But and I do like Sunra because he's in some ways I think Sunra of like all the composers is very much like an emblem or an exemplar of like theory or a new type of philosopher, like emerging of art and science for the future. But actually my favorite part of the program was the Duke part. And the reason why is because there's something so important about being able to see Duke, not just as a revolutionary, but the first of something. Someone who literally born in the late 1800s, born in the shadow of not just emancipation, but the disappointment of Reconstruction. Someone who was able to use music as a weapon to organize music. I think I'm totally like stealing this from the way Michelle framed it at the event. But basically, Duke was the first person to have the courage and the vision and the genius to basically organize music to express something of basically the moving current development of his own people. Like, we're a people in motion, and not just for ourselves, but to prove to the world that this world has failed. This world has failed as it is. And if we're going to make it succeed, if humanity is going to succeed, if we're going to complete humanity, and if we say that we are about freedom, XYZ, that like we believe in individual rights, justice, then like we have to actually make it real. And I feel like Duke was basically the first to like almost grasp at any straw he could. Take the instruments, put them together, compose music, not just for 1 decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, but he had the blessing of a whole life, many decades. And actually, we didn't show it, but personally, like I love the Afro-Eurasian eclipse. And I love it because, like, one, I really like the cover art, which does show, the cover art basically shows all these different, like, African and Asian people to show that the future is not white. The future is everything else. The future is everything else that has been deliberately and violently put down by Europe. And to this day, like new and more consolidated versions of white supremacy in America. But then it's a cover. But actually, the song I like the most is personally I like Did you read it? But the first song, Chinwazari, is where Duke says this thing where he's like, you know, what I'm about to play is, you know, this whole Afro-Asian Eurasian eclipse of eight movements. He's like, the reason why I'm putting it together is because there's a new world coming. He basically says, he's like, there's a new world coming, and it is from the Asiatic, like the East. He says it's from the East. And the music I'm about to play, like the world is moving so fast that even those who call themselves Asians don't realize that they're gonna have to become something else. Something even like almost like Asian plus, like a new type of Asian. And yeah, it's really deep because, and I mean, it's the question that you had raised about like, what is Duke self-conscious? It's really deep because yeah, essentially that is the evidence. The evidence. Yeah, that is the evidence.
At that point,
In the 70s, right?
at that point, absolutely. But I also was willing to back off a little and make from a musicological point of view. Because the way we put this stuff together, remember, the early Duke Ellington band still had a what that we don't see later on, and that Black people, Afro-Americans have forgotten they had the banjo. The early Duke ensembles had the banjo in them. Go out here on the street right now and ask Black kids, do they have anything to do with a banjo?
Yeah, that's a problem. They should.
So that banjo came from West Africa to the instrument called African. Okay, so yes, you're absolutely right. In the original, what's so interesting about Ellington's original ensembles is that they have a connection with before there was change. The banjo is still there, keeping rhythm, and then later on.
But also, well, musicologically, what's also interesting is that Duke then he takes European instruments and then also instruments even from Asia. Musicologically, he takes the instruments from Europe and brings them farther in terms of sound and meaning and purpose, farther than even the Europeans could with their own instruments.
Yes, he's creating a language.
It's a language that's universal for the world. And yeah. And actually, okay, I think the second success based on what we're talking about of the event, I have to say is I think the reason why I'm like really into music and this music now is because it's also basically showing how, okay, I said it at the event and I feel like it kind of went like woo over like people's heads, even my own head. But like Duke, actually like even the Duke section shows that someone like Duke is basically a theorist. He's making new theory because it's the whole idea of how is there an existing language, right? Like whether it's art or even the way we talk, is there an existing language or framework to be able to explain, for example, let's take Indonesia, the current struggles of Indonesia. And in some ways you could actually say that Duke or Mingus or Sun Ra most better encapsulate like the struggles of, let's say, the Indonesian people or the Palestinian people, where, okay, we've come far, technically these nations are independent, but children are still starving and the countries are underdeveloped, yet there's still beauty and there's jokes still happening in the streets of Jakarta and all that. And so I'm basically asking this question of like theory, like the whole point of when we say theory is there enough an adequate framework to explain the current condition and forward movement of human beings and their struggles. And in some ways, like, I feel like someone like Duke, even just from the specificity that he was trying to express something about Black folk in America and both the beauty and disappointments and the resistance, was able to maybe create a much better universal expression of something happening in even the world today. So I feel like that's also what, like, to me, it was interesting where the music symposium event, even though it was about music, it brought so much energy to me in thinking about this idea of like, in the democratic revolutionary struggle, what do we imagine the future to be like, and what kind of both vision in terms of ideas and then language can we like use to express that future? Because that future is not white, that future is not Western, that future is something human. And where is that human center from? It's from the East. Like Duke, that's why Duke was like, you know, he was like, okay, I'm not just sticking to like Black, Brown, and Beige. I'm not just talking about like the groans and the grunts of the work songs, but there's a door that allows you to connect to Asia. Like, you know, we played Isfahan and, you know, Monkey Jungle, like the African flower. And, but like, you know, Afro-Eurasian Eclipse, Latin America. And yes. Oh, sorry. Money Jungle. I would like that to play, but yeah. Yeah, and then obviously Mingus also does Mingus too. There's Mingus and especially Sun Ra. They all are basically dealing with like what is the futuristic? Like what is a futuristic civilization? What is the future? Like even in America, if the American people are going to have are going to even be able to live in an existing world, which could be nuked at any point from like war of a elite small group of elites at the top, or if the American people, as like many different races and types of people, are ever going to like even be happy or be content or satisfied or complete, they're going to have to reckon with that the future is much different than anything we can conceive of as it is.
Let me let Jeremiah come in.
Yeah, I feel like this conversation is really interesting because like I know I brought up on the second day like this whole thing around language and Sun Ra's use of language.
I liked it.
Because,
I
like,
liked it a lot.
yeah, like I'm into poetry and
Yeah.
I'm really starting to like dig more Sun Ra's poetry. But I guess part of it because even if like was the conditions for us to have this kind of conversation, you know, all of it is kind of mediated through language, and in that sense, like language is always kind of like, to me, language is always a kind of approximation of something else that we're trying to get at.
Right,
Which is,
that's
and in that sense, like either you have to invent new language, or you have to give the existing language a new meaning. And I think in that sense that we're trying to both, maybe reach for new language, but also to give existing words, like even the basic word of like music, when we talk about music, like what do we mean by music? And I think we're both trying to give the idea of music, what we associate with music, we're trying to fill it with more than is currently, I think, available in the imaginary that is given to most people in American society. And I say that in part because, like, exactly to what Emily was saying, one of the conclusions I've been drawing from the music symposium is that it's not just us saying this, but that if, let's say, Du Bois, and this goes to also the knowledge conference we're planning, but if, let's say, Du Bois introduces and brings into the world a new way of doing science, like an actual new way of doing science, which is, you know, our whole concept of the world moving of thought from Du Bois. In that same way, I think that Afro-America brings into the world a new purpose of music, a new function, new functions of music, new meanings of music, and what music is for and what it can do. Because I think, you know, music has existed basically for as long as humans have existed. It is in some ways that link of contemporary humanity to the past ages of human existence and to civilization and all that stuff. But what is also true at the same time is that if we consider also like this kind of demarcation of like the modern epoch, the modern age, the modern era of human history, it necessarily means that all of the kind of expressions which have already always existed in humankind have to take on a new function, new form, new meaning. And in that sense, I feel like it's not just us saying this, but I think what I feel like we're discovering or rediscovering through like people like Duke or Sun Ra or Mingus is that through the kind of journey of Black people through the history of this country in particular, like the meaning of music has basically been expanded, like it's been exploded to mean much more than I think it previously had in kind of, especially in like the European sense. But I feel like as I was like thinking about it, and I feel like the ways that like we are even conceptualizing music is very broad because we're basically asking it to fulfill several different, like many different functions as like we've said, like a side of ideological struggle, as the attempt to form a common language, not just within the United States, but also for humanity. Also, like what we've also like said with like the music symposium itself, like music is what helps to spark a kind of democratic process in which people can actually talk to each other and have something important to say to each other. And it also reflects, as we said, yeah, like kind of futuristic, it can reflect a futuristic imaginary about what the world can be and what it should be. And I think the way that Du Bois also says it is like music is Black people's message to the world. And so in that sense, it's like the way that humanity knows America and knows Black people in particular is in many ways like through their music. And in that sense, also like with what Emily was saying, like music also in this epoch, which is what we're trying to understand of like this new world movement of thought, which we associate with Du Bois, with the Black freedom struggle. Yeah, like music becomes like a way of knowing, like it becomes a form, it becomes a way of knowledge. And in that sense, it is part of like basically the development of consciousness and of morality and of
The
values.
history of consciousness.
And I think, I guess related to that, I feel like part of what we're saying also is that music almost becomes like one of like, I don't know if this is the right word, but one of like the modes of like civilization itself. Like it is one of like the kind of central engines of like even what we consider to be like the development of whether current or new civilizations. And then I feel like the other things that were brought up was, especially with like music like Sun Ra, is like music also as like a very practical function does help to basically heal people. Like it heals your mind and your spirit, and that is part of what is also needed, especially in this time. And that the other thing which I picked up was like music also as like a form of memory. And like being able to, I think this is something I brought up before, but being able to shift the paradigm from just like a kind of stale and kind of weak sense of nostalgia almost about the music, which actually has nothing to say to the current time, as opposed to saying, okay, like there is memory. Like there is like, you know, people like Ransom and Miyoshi, the memories that they have about Sun Ra, and being able to actually draw out that memory and use it as an actual weapon for this time. So I don't know, I was just like thinking about that, like how basically like it's not just us saying these things, but we're trying to define and capture something and identify something, which is basically, yeah, like does the Black struggle, like do African Americans introduce into the world a new purpose for music itself, which is then something that can be used around the world. But I don't know. I had other questions about, you know, Sun Ra and what we mean by the end of jazz. But I feel like that's like
Go ahead, Salvador.
Yeah, well, I mean, I wanted to just build on that because, I mean, actually, I had a lot of thoughts about the symposium itself, but I think this discussion is, you know, like really clarifying for me why, you know, we've been talking about this as a research symposium.
Yeah.
And, you know, I say this because I think this is what Kathy or Michelle brought up initially, this question of like what is the revolutionary today, or you know, like who is a revolutionary artist today? And I think this is an important question to, you know, deal with seriously at a time when art has been, when the question of meaning has been severed from art. This has been the project of, you know, postmodernism, where, like, you know, what happens when you sever any idea of meaning from art, any form, is that you also sever the revolutionary essence of art. So then the question of who is a revolutionary artist, it becomes that, you know, in what ways does the individual artist take part in whatever you think of as, you know, a revolutionary, you know, like what is a revolutionary struggle? Now, this question has no meaning in a non-revolutionary time because, you know, you can't take part, like, you know, for instance, you talk about, say, Mingus, it's clear to, or say Baldwin, it's clear that whatever their art is about, their lives are also, you know, directly involved in the revolutionary struggle of their time. But I think to ask this question in our time, when we don't have, you know, when we are, you know, maybe in a pre-revolutionary time, but definitely, you know, you know, like not in a revolutionary time in the same sense as 60 years back, it becomes that you lose all meaning of a revolutionary artist, except in terms of the form of it, which is why, you know, this whole question, and we talked about this like last Tuesday at the, you know, the reading group, that you have a sense of the revolutionary artist in terms of what kind of gestures he makes, you know, and how he positions itself regarding the, you know, the popular lines that the ruling class sets them to be, like, you know, sets out for us to take. But I think what the symposium really clarifies in this discussion is that the revolutionary essence of a revolutionary artist or a musician or a composer is to be found in the substance of the art itself. It's not, I think that's why we are taking this music so seriously, because it's not, like what everyone was saying, that this is not simply to understand the revolutionary, it's not simply to understand the music of these figures who happen to, where they position themselves or where they were at. And this goes to the question that you were initially raising, I think, that, where was you at in the 20s, where was Mingus at in the 60s and so on. But I think this discussion is making me think that we're also seriously considering the question of how do we understand the revolutionary essence of the art itself? And the other question is, who is capable of understanding it? Is it the musicologist and so on? I mean, I think the same question applies to science. And I think the answer given by scientists is that yes, only scientists and experts can understand science. And I think with which we would disagree. That this is the way to know the world. It belongs to the ordinary man and woman. It belongs to everybody. And this is why I think to take this music seriously, to understand the revolutionary essence of it, we're also, like the symposium is also saying that this project belongs to humanity because humanity is involved in the fight for truth. And how do you understand truth as not something that exists? Yeah, go ahead.
No, because I really liked Jeremiah when you said when you're like trying to figure out like writing and like poetry and how language is always getting at something. And so that's why it's always impressive, like when you see or hear a real good poet, just hit it and quit it. Like they know what they want to say. Or like there's all these iconic phrases and songs that we all listen to. That helps me express something about joy, happiness, love, appreciation, how I feel. That is like, I needed that. And then I only want to say that for me, the symposium taught me or reminded me something about, I think I was like listening to Sun Ra and I was like on a walk and I was thinking, or maybe it was Mingus. It's kind of blurring. The point is that being, I forget if Mingus said this or not. I'm blurry. I'm sorry, guys. But like, maybe it was Mingus because it's something about how he had to play with an instrument. And I was like, I want to be an instrument for peace. Like, I want to be an instrument of light. Like, I want to be an instrument. And like, it reminded me why being an instrument for something is like a part of that phenomena of being positive or trying to whatever scientist or artist or whatever, being an instrument or a vessel for the truth, fighter for the truth. Anyway, I just wanted to bring that
up. To go back to what I was saying, I was talking about truth because, I think like what you started with at some point about the inadequacy of, 19th century epistemology. I think we're seeing music in the same terms as philosophy. We're saying that music and philosophy are the weapons with which people can fight for the truth. People can be armed to fight for new ideas. And honestly, this symposium is something of its own kind because, like, what does it even mean to talk about music in the way that we framed it in the way that you guys framed the discussion of these artists. So yeah.
Can I just add one thing to what you said? This was also in response to the question you raised on the first day about what we mean by like the criteria when we just say like who's a revolutionary artist. And I wanted to say this to you on the second day, but I don't think you were here. So I just want to say to you now. But basically, like it's because one of the things that I think the music symposium, to what you were saying to Margaret too, is that what it did very successfully is that it made it so that I feel like it made everyone in the room feel like we are all agents of knowledge. We are all people who are capable of producing knowledge. And I think that was very profound and very important. And in that sense, like when we even say, what counts as a revolutionary artist? What is the criteria? Who is a revolutionary artist? It's not just about a kind of one-sided thing of, I judge, and then whoever meets that criteria, then I categorize them as this versus that. I think it also implicates us, like it implicates like you and me in terms of, okay, well, if I consider that they're revolutionary artists, even before that, I have to ask the question, what does the music move me to do? Like, how does the music actually change me as a human being? Like, what new thoughts does it make me have? Like, how does it make me see other people around me? How does it make me question even, yeah, like the only purpose of my own life? And I think in that sense, like it has to be a kind of much more, I'm not saying completely subjective, but like actually you have, like, I feel like we have to consider ourselves as like actually, yeah, in some ways subjects to try to reach that knowledge. But I guess I was just phrasing it because it's like, it can never be a kind of one way thing where we just judge, but actually has to be like, okay, like, is the music forcing me or compelling me to actually change or to try to be a better human being? Like, I feel like that to me is part of the criteria of like, okay, like, what does the music actually do? What do these artists actually do to try to change society is also basically how it implicates us.
I can answer that question if you.
No, go ahead. Let her go first.
I'll be very quick because
Take your time. Don't worry
no,
about
I
it.
know a lot of people want to say, but just to add a little more, like little bit to what everybody has said also, just like when you're introduced to this music for the first time, having never listened to it, and you're trying to make sense of it. Okay, no, I want to say it another way. I want to say that one of the things that I think I really got out of the symposium, and that's why I think it was important, is also that it basically makes you never again be able to look at this music and see it almost as a snapshot or something static or something that you just hear and it sounds that are that's very aesthetically pleasing, but you can no longer again look at this music and separate it from the revolutionary purpose it was created for, and separate it. I mean, it is made more concrete when you understand the person or the revolutionary artist who created it and the purpose that he created it for. And the only other thing I wanted to say is, I think there is this, we're talking about a music that was produced by an oppressed people, but I don't think, and this took me a long time to realize that the music is not special or revolutionary because it was produced by an oppressed people, where the fact that it was produced by an oppressed people is a testament, in fact, to that particular people's capacity or futuristic vision for all of humanity. But the fact of the oppression does not automatically place on this music some value. What places value on this music is that it was a deliberate choice. It's not like, it was not like, as an oppressed people, devoid of any other avenues of struggle, devoid of actually being able to take up, say, armed struggle to basically get rid of the oppression that you're subjected to. This is all that Black people were left with, the realm of art and culture and so on, which I'm afraid is the way sometimes this music and this history is looked at. But what I'm trying to say, and I hope I'm saying it as clearly as I'm thinking it, is it wasn't that this was all that was left. This was the only realm that was left in which struggle could be waged by Black people, but it was a deliberate recognition of the fact that art and music have a revolutionary role to play in society and have, the ability to actually transform people. What you were also saying, when you hear it, does it change you? Does it want you to think differently about love and beauty and struggle and freedom? So it was a deliberate choice. And I wanted to make that point because I think it came to me quite late, and it came also more concretely because of the way this event was done. But sorry.
Even like they.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think you're absolutely right. My question, which is caused all this talk. I was trying to make a distinction between the people who self-consciously say that they are doing something revolutionary. It tells you the shape of jazz. He is making a statement. I am breaking. I think Ellington does that. affects a new sound, new instrumentation. But it's rooted in the past. He has a banjo, Thomas. He hasn't lost the folk element, but he's doing something new, and he is doing all the other things that have been taught. And the other thing I wanted to say that Mr. August is here today. I think, and I was quoting you, that you were pointing out the constraints on Afro-Americans, and that sometimes the fewer avenues for expression. Elijah Muhammad said this too. Elijah Muhammad said, you always see the black man point, and you have to be very careful. However, I don't say that I would not overdo that, because we still managed to create some institutions. We still had some architects. We still had doctors. We had people even in the 1920s, people at the University of Chicago. Well, I mean, I could go on and on and on, but the notion of a coherent, self-sustaining community, which you actually lost in places like Greenwood, Vernon, that actually has eroded and strained over time. So I'm going with you on that. And I do want to bring this creativity that we're talking about, humanity, it hasn't been reinterpreted yet, but since you're doing the science, program, let us not forget the two young ladies, Micaiah Jackson and Kalshia Johnson, the two women teenagers from Louisiana who did something that was said to be unsolvable and impossible. They proved the Pythagorean theorem. This is in the last 2 years, using trigonometry, which was said to be could not be done because without circularity reason. Even though they've been on CNN, 60 Minutes, in even magazine, you can find them online. You can look them up. Two black girls put Pythagorean theorem. They will come up. This is not been celebrated by musicians, by poets. Maybe it's too soon. But we have to talk about it. Because what people said about their discovery is that it had implications beyond mathematics. It had implications for other science. Who will take advantage of that? Who are the revolutionaries who will seize it and make it so that it helps improve the economy of the oppressed? Improve the. How many teenagers I know about two young ladies? This is a real thing. It happened in real time. We were all alive. The question may be too big. I don't think it's too big.
But it should not, that should not take away from this.
Oh, no.
And let me explain why. I agree with you. And I want to, in fact, I remember you brought it up last week, and I heard about it.
Right.
And I didn't really get into it. But see, I think a reckoning with this long historic process that we call modernity, and a rupture in that, and the possibility of something new. And as great as their achievement is, I still think the achievement of the imagination of artists and revolutionaries and theorists who infused a new consciousness into the life world of an entire people, which then makes possible in ways that we don't even know how to account for these two young women. But I still think, yes, no, I'm not saying, but I think, because see, I think we have lost sight. We elders, we Black folk, have lost sight and lost control of our own knowledge of our own history and ways to know our own history. I'm gonna tell you how one way it's done. Afrocentrism, the global Africa. Well, what about this people here, which may have triggered the liberation, the concept of liberation of Africa and Asia? That's one of the things they say. So I would say, that's all I would say. I agree with you, but then again,
What they've done is so inconsistent.
yes, I would agree with you.
They're young people.
No, I agree with you. But
Spend 3 hours a night for 3, 4 years. Come on, show me, man.
no, I agree with it. But see, okay, but see, let us not, okay, I agree with you. Okay, and I agree with you. But see, okay, we're saying a music, but here, first of all, you know what I'm interested in? How do these young people find a way to that music when everything in this culture says that's not what you supposed to be into? Well, like Puma told me when she was over in India, metal, heavy metal, hard metal. Yeah, or like frankly, I don't know what kind of music they like. Emily said she was not into music, or to me, it's very fascinating because the reinterpretation of this great music for the future and for this time. And then for them to conclude, like Simbarta said, that this elevates philosophy to a new level. You know what I'm saying? I think if you would have asked me in the long struggle for freedom, I think the great contribution is to understand what we, studied in this music and how it will be applied to the philosophy of science, to the epistemology of knowledge, all of this. I'm not taking away from the two young women at all. Go ahead.
One of the things about it, and this is nothing new about music. Human beings think in terms of story. We don't think in terms, this is one of the quotes from the gentleman Noah Harari I just spoke of. We don't think in terms of equations, statistics. We tell stories. And in that storytelling, we talk about stories come out, the narrative. As fabulous as that story is, most people cannot comprehend something. They don't do the math. Math is so, and the funny thing is, if you handed a math equation to someone who can't read it and the music on the sheet music from their favorite song, they wouldn't know it. Because if you can't speak that language, it doesn't come through. But the beat, the vibe, the violins, the voice, all of those things, you don't have to come from a culture to appreciate music. And so and I say this with respect, it's a low bar. Music is like candy. It just gets right in, like out, boom. It goes straight into the bloodstream. Whereas to get people to start to think, and this, I think, one of the reasons that humanity struggles is that we have not learned to communicate beyond. I feel is about as baseline as this world gets. I feel, and then that's the end of the conversation.
And of course, I can say that we've been talking about Ellington and Mingus, and we have been moved to people here who never listened to them. My father was just basically a swinger. But if you play Ellington, go out on the street, take Ellington out to high school, Ellington can be difficult.
Yes.
Or they're going to say it's boring.
Because
Hip hop is seduce or certain types of rhythmic approaches, let me say it generically then. As far as I'm concerned, what Ellington did in the early 1900s was the first world music.
Yeah, that's
It was the first world, and it continues as a particular variant of world music. But then you have people from Nigeria and other places doing it. That when you say world music, that's what people think. You don't think Ellington. I think Ellington is world music, but I also know those other.
No, and that's what Emily was saying. Because and okay, her parents immigrated here from China, and I mean, even though Alice always reminded, but I'm an American. Yes, but there is something through their parents that linked them to China. There's certain ways that they act. I don't know whether they got a, first of all, I'll tell you, you know something? They have a problem criticizing or speaking in a critical way to older people.
They do.
They do. They really do. And sometimes even if they disagree, well, not so much with me these days, but if they disagree with y'all, they will be very
Respectful.
deliberate.
Oh, that's it.
So there are things about them, and therefore, I know to me, it's extraordinary to observe it, to see them see this music as really world music. But the other thing is, and this might speak to the kind of cognitive manipulation of young people and of Black people that is going on through all kinds of means in this society. We have not fully embraced what is our legacy. What we, no. But this could have devastating consequences for our forward movement. We can't, and so this is what, we gotta come back to this. We got to stay on this. But I know we have to talk about the science. Oh, did I cut you off?
Yeah, we do.
No, I mean.
Because he had wanted to talk about their personality.
Now, but we have we have a science. Oh, go.
Oh, can I just make one last point, which is also related?
Did I adequately describe y'all?
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Sorry, I'm talking too much. I'm like,
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's true. I do have very
you
Chinese values.
Yes.
Yeah. Like it is.
I'll tell you
very
one
polite
thing.
to elders.
They told me they don't have any idea of not paying your bills on time. They have that's what she took. She said she can't imagine paying late fees. And that's all I pay is late fees. I mean, it's just certain, civilizational things that are, but anyways, let me shut up.
But well, the thing I wanted to say was related to science is like, okay, even something like math, like what people consider to be math today is not even like what the Greeks think math is. Like math today is just memorization.
Right.
And in some ways, I think the reason why the music symposium kind of awakened something in me is because when we say like it made something concrete, I think there's like a real concrete question if we are to like say that we're interested in revolutionary change, which is the question of who will be able to imagine what the new forms of social and political organization will look like in this country? Like things like who will actually, I mean, I guess maybe something you said, but who will build like an actual humane economy, a peace economy? And I think these questions, it's not a question of technique that we don't have enough math or STEM. It's not just that, like, yeah, okay, we need real skills. The fundamental question is from what imaginary and what framework? And actually, like that imaginary is going to have to come from something much closer, like to Duke Ellington or Mingus or Sun Ra than let's say Marx and Lenin. Because at the end of the day, any theory just becomes dogma. Any theory just becomes dead, like sterile, really boring dogma if it's disconnected from real people and the forward movement of the people, which is why I think which is why I'm so into this thing of like Duke and Mingus and Sun Ra. I think they should be embraced just like someone like Baldwin, James Baldwin, much more embraced as our theorists, like the new theorists of a new world, much more than even like Marx. And that's not to say that Marx, like everything he said was bad or not useful, but it's to say that we're in a new period here.
You're right. Can you give an example? You know the example if you give us one. You already know
An example of what?
of this transformation. Because really what you're describing is the notion of emergence, something that is greater than the sum of the parts. That's what you're talking about. That's what you're talking about. So where do you see this in action? When you listen to those solos on Mingus and albums,
this is what like when Kathy said so much we did not have. Now that's why I'm gonna shift it over to the science conference coming up in June, because that we're still working this out. That's what I'm gonna say. Let me just turn it over to them. Who's gonna say it? Paul Glove.
Well, I feel like Emily really started it, but because that's really the starting point. Well, we had our first meeting for planning the science conference, which we are hoping to do on the weekend of, I guess, the 28th and 29th of June, TBD, but that's sort of tentatively the plan. And what we are planning to call it is Knowledge and the Crisis of Western Civilization, subtitle, Where Do We Go From Here?
Wait, can you say it again?
Well, where do we go from here? Knowledge and the Crisis of Western Civilization. Where do we go from here? And we've only just started to put many different pieces together under the banner of this crisis of knowledge being a reflection of the crisis of Western civilization. But central to it is our assertion that like Western civilization and its current whatever you want to call it, guardian or defender, which is the American university, has failed, has demonstrably failed to take knowledge for humanity forward. But more than that, for at least 60 to 80 years, it has been engaged in a counter-revolution against knowledge and cognition, which more than anybody else has affected young people and what they can even imagine for their own lives and what they can imagine as their contribution to a broader purpose than their own lives. And particularly right now, when you look at these universities in crisis with the feud between the state and Trump and the universities and so on, it is really a demonstration of the fact that this ideological consensus or this hegemonic ideological consensus that was established after the World War II and the Cold War period, where the university really becomes the arbiter of all discourse, all narratives, all thought, basically dictating to people how they should relate to the world, what they should think, what is right and wrong, what is the meaning of progress. This position, this status has not held. And we are in a unique moment where you're actually being able to witness its collapse as we speak. And so for us, this is not just a moment to be hysterical and, lost and, oh my God, what are we going to do here? What we want to say is that there is something that the people can take up. There is something that we can do, because the struggle for knowledge, and philosophy is a revolutionary political task that is indispensable to our struggle for a human future itself. And out of this chaos of a dying Western civilization, what we can do, if we have the courage and moral commitment to take up this task, we can carve out, like we've been saying, a new epistemology, a new way of doing science that finds that creative synthesis with art, and something that's rooted in what we have said, Du Bois starts, which is a new movement of world thought, a new conception of modernity and what completes it. And what we also see, what we are putting forward as an experiment that will not be conducted in the university, but will involve millions and millions of people, because it is really their purview too, because it's their future we're talking about. And to also say, when I say that it will involve millions of people, it's also to say that so far, because of Western civilization and its dominant position in the world, actual people have been kept or been excluded from this creative, constructive, revolutionary, democratic task of creating knowledge and taking us into new basis for civilization even. So one of the things we talked about yesterday during planning is the starting point is we have to define knowledge, and that definition has to go beyond the enlightenment sense of knowledge or what the university or experts put out, to give a futuristic vision, and to say that knowledge basically is not the property or the sole purview of white people or white civilization, but belongs to all people, because knowledge requires the human agent. It can only be created by human beings. And it is also in this light that we have made the move to Kant. You know, the reason we are studying Kant in the science reading group and so on is also because we see him as a revolutionary thinker, perhaps like representing the highest achievement of Enlightenment philosophy, and him more than anybody making that decisive and irreversible move towards epistemology. And for the first time, basically elevating the human being as the agent of knowledge, as the agent that using reason creates knowledge, which then is inherited by all human beings. And the other thing I wanted to say is, because this came up, the reason why we even want to go to Kant, like basically circumventing Marx and Engels, even go back to Kant, go back to an earlier point in the development of this ideological history, is because of what we have been discovering and what we've observed over a long time in free school, is that Marxism, Leninism fails in some ways to explain the world as it is right now. And it fails perhaps because it's too prescriptive and it's too involved in sort of putting down laws of human development, and does not have as much space or as much room for human agency. And so we want to go back to Kant, also because a study of Kant and a study of what he was trying to achieve vis-a-vis human knowledge also helps us to articulate more clearly what is the problem with something like string theory, or what is the problem with something like postmodernism. And to it, today we would also add what is the problem with, say, analytical or academic Marxism and Leninism, where from the way Kant's project is set out, it makes it clear that these other theoretical predispositions are basically counter-revolutionary because they attack reason itself, and they attack the human being's ability to know and reason. And in some ways, what they end up producing is almost delusion. Inevitably, they end up contributing to delusion and cynicism because they don't want to describe anything real. They don't want to describe the real world, and instead, are more interested in narratives and so on and so. So they go on to obscure more than to explain about the world. I know I'm sort of like going here and there, but the other thing that we would want to establish in this conference, that we do not stop with Kant and Hegel, because on one hand, Kant is a revolutionary for basically putting the human being at the center of the question of who produces and inherits knowledge, but then he does not get all of it right, or he cannot resolve all of the unanswered, unresolved contradictions of modernity and Western civilization. And in order to do that, we need Du Bois, and we need this new movement of world thought, where what Du Bois, like Jeremiah was saying, does is to even introduce a new way of doing science by case that it's not just the laws that we are interested in, but we are also interested in chance, which means we are not just interested in what is determinate, but we are interested in human possibility. We are interested in what human beings can make of this world. And this creates that space for art and music and the imaginary as also a mode of knowledge production, and something that more concretely, so basically we're talking about an epistemology that is concretely connected with the people and their worldview and their imaginary in their attempt to understand and explain the world. So that's sort of like a broad description of some of the things we talked about, and you guys can add to it. But in terms of some concrete elements for the conference itself that came out, we, going back, like touching upon our conversation about the music, we thought of framing a panel with Kant, Einstein, and Sun Ra as the...
Nice! That is so cool!
And to basically talk about the different periods and also different stages of human consciousness.
That is so much fun.
World situations that they're responding to.
I'm gonna do my
And,
homework.
which part, like basically what they work out and what is left behind and what is left on the table for us to take up and so on. The other thing that we talked about was to basically, after broadly introducing the purpose of the symposium and talking about knowledge broadly like this, to explain what is the task for us to take up. The division of the days, we're not sure entirely right now whether it will be 2 days or 2.5 or 3. But
It's like a 3.
part of it will be, we want to separate it into a part that talks about the crisis, which basically right now talks about the civilization crisis in the West, but also the university, string theory, postmodernism. We also were, playing with the idea of having a panel on the historically Black colleges and the mandate that they were supposed to represent in the past, which was concretely tied to the question of freedom and liberatory knowledge, and how in some ways that mandate might have been abandoned or betrayed in our times. So, and also pop culture. So all of this in to basically describe the crisis that we want to give language to, and basically talk about its various parts. But then we also want to have a part that's on the resolution of the question, which is where the voice becomes so central. And we had talked about 4 or 5 texts of the voice being foundational to this conference. And just to lay out the text, and I don't know if you're going to add more to it, but his essay on Leonardo da Vinci, his essay on Galileo Galilei, his essay in Dusk of Dawn entitled Science and Empire, and his essay on sociology, sociology hesitant. And the other thing we had discussed was From Souls of Black Folk, of our spiritual strivings, to connect the idea directly to this. Like basically we are talking about knowledge because it is a question of human striving. So these are some of the things we talked about. And in the resolution part, I think Nuri was also bringing it up. No, not today. I'm forgetting. But to also, like, while we're talking about the voice as the originary figure of this new movement of world thought, we also think it would be useful to show the concrete manifestations of that in world's people, the anti-colonial struggle, the Bandung, conference, and so on. Maybe even show historic footage of people delivering speeches to show that they were part of this broad vision that we think Du Bois most completely gives voice to or gives language to. And then, of course, in the part of the resolution, we want to revisit somebody like Sandra, somebody like Duke Ellington, to show that the artistic, the literary also fits very much within this conception of a new language and a new science that is more fitting of what humanity needs right now to take us into the future, to take us to a new civilization. So, yeah, that. Oh, yeah, the dates are tentatively right now the 27, 28, 29. We're also trying to do part of this symposium at the Lucian Blackwell Library and the rest of it here. But, we'll figure all of that out, how many days and where. And so this is about as much as I remembered from last day's.
So cool. Nice.
Agree. I feel like, well, especially just with the library, that's actually a few of us, we received an email from Barbara, the library we've been and she was the one who actually reached out to us saying, oh, like, we want to explore more possibilities for partnering with the free school. And so that has been very positive and encouraging for us. And so one of the ideas for kind of having even like part of the event or program be at the library itself is to have, kind of community discussion around these ideas of, like, what is the new knowledge that is needed and who will create it in the time of the collapse of Western civilization. And I feel like for me, kind of the way that I interpret part of the kind of ideological and political purpose of the conference itself is like, I feel like, I may have brought this up earlier, but In the Sun Ra movie, Space is the Place, he kind of starts the movie with this kind of mantra, like, it's after the end of the world, don't you know that yet? And he says it over and over and over again. And I kind of interpret that as him basically saying, yeah, it's after the end of the reign of Western civilization, of the age of Europe, don't you know that yet? But because the thing is that, like, Sun Ra is not he's not a pessimistic artist, he's not a cynical artist. And so in that way, it's almost like both, like I think Jockey said, it's kind of like a warning, but it's also a beckoning, like, okay, like out of, like 4%, out of the chaos of this period, which is maybe a longer period of the collapse of the West, what will be created and who will create it. And I think the other kind of immediate thing is that, we want this conference to build on, especially last year's knowledge conference, which we did as part of the year Baldwin, and which was titled "Knowledge and the Crisis of the American University."
Right.
And in that sense, like, kind of build on the discoveries, the arguments, the assertions we made there. But especially, like you said, to build upon the music symposium. I think because there were so many questions that were put on the table by the music symposium, which I think have to be part of this discussion. But yeah, I feel like there's a lot on the table that we're kind of working out and trying to investigate and see, like, how the different pieces can fit together. So yeah, those are like the main things.
Well, so I think, the two big reference points that are on my mind are the music symposium and like last year's science conference, where I feel like the crisis has basically like developed and exacerbated, where a lot of the things that we were saying about like the ideological consensus, like the state of like basically collapse has been borne out, and it's even further than it was. And so I feel like on the one hand, the crisis has deepened, but also I think our idea or conception of what solutions are has also deepened. And I feel like having both of those things is important, where I feel like obviously we're not interested in redoing, like talking about string theory just to like revisit it from a year ago. I feel like it needs to be different. And so in my mind, like part of like the Einstein Sun Ra formulation is like interesting for me because each of them are into particular problems of like human civilization and modernity. And I feel like the question, like for Kant, it's like whatever, the Enlightenment, like feudalism, like the church. For Einstein, I feel like it's like Nazism, like World War, nuclear war. And then I feel like for Sun Ra, like it's like everything that we talk about, like the industrialization, the counter-revolutionary culture, like the color line, Jim Crow, like all of it. And so I feel like the other thing that I liked about the music symposium was that it put the questions like to talk about, and it didn't necessarily demand like we tie it all up with a bow, because the point is that it's actually a very big problem. Like it will require like week by week. And I think like that's why thinking about it in terms of like year by year, like how are we actually moving forward? And also like how is the way that we do politics changing? And so I feel like for one, like there are a lot of ideas, like there have to be presentations, but I feel like we don't want it to just be like presenting. Like we want it to actually be like talking, just like some loose stuff. And also like drawing on like this thing of the concrete that the music symposium did really well. And I think just one more thing that I want to toss out there. I keep putting it, like I think Doc said yesterday, like he's interested in sort of like a potential triad of art, science, and ideology. And I think one other like extra really big advance, but it's like Du Bois with the New World Movement of thought. And I feel like I'm exploring that, whether it's through like Van Damme, who like that conference like literally pays tribute to Du Bois, or even like the Harlem Renaissance, which would not have been possible without Du Bois as an architect of thought, and like Ellington, like all of that, basically showing how Du Bois, is the originator, and how that brings us actually to
Right. Well, it's like how, whether it's the world anti-colonial struggle or the Harlem Renaissance or civil rights movement, how does framing it through the language of the world movement of thought, how does that change our understanding of even like those? Because we talked about these historical struggles for so long, but in some ways kind of reorienting it through like as part of its manifestations and expressions of Du Bois's world movement of thought, I think changes some things even how we understand them. And the other thing I wanted to add to that is that one of the main assertions that we made last year with the knowledge, is that both that the university, the modern American elite university, is a central part of the actual functioning of the American state itself, but that the reason for that is that one of the primary functions of this current state, this current ruling class in the United States, is to control thought, to control ideas, to control the way that ideas and knowledge is produced and shared and developed. And in that sense, we've been operating for so long, especially in this country, in a situation in which the way that knowledge operates, where it takes place, who produces it, has been so tightly controlled by basically, like universities, elite universities, by like the media, by all these institutions. And what we're living through is a period in which, Neri said this yesterday, but in which the center has completely fallen out. The center has collapsed. The center could not, that kind of tight control of ideas, of knowledge, of thought, that has completely, the bottom has fallen out.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, it's like, okay, like, well, in that kind of situation, then okay, like who is going to actually search for new ideas? But also, like, actually, I was thinking about this, even in whether it's like postmodernism in academia or like string theory or other things that we talk about, one of the kind of the values or the functions of it, at least in my interpretation, is that being able to examine these kind of things, which I feel like for ordinary people may seem very like abstract or very like kind of up there, is that because we link them as part of essentially a ruling elite project and a ruling elite agenda, to be able to examine, okay, let's say, what is the crisis in academia? Like, what is the crisis amongst like scientists and physicists? That is in some ways a way for us to evaluate what are the relative strengths and weaknesses of this current American ruling elite. Like, if you are able to see something in the crisis, does that tell you something about, like the weakness of this current ruling class? And if so, where is that? How does that weakness manifest? So I just wanted to bring that up.
So Jerry, the three things from the article that you mentioned? Gideon Rockman article.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, because I think a few years ago, the Financial Times columnist Gideon Rockman had come out with an essay basically making the argument that the kind of three main pillars that hold together the American empire are the American military, the American dollar, and the American university. And amongst those three, the role of the American university, not just within the US, but around the world, is the least understood. And deserves, I think, in that sense, the closest amount of actual intense scrutiny and observation and study. And so,
I thought that Nuri last night made, I think, a very important observation that I think is almost foundational for us going forward. And that was, in a lot of ways, the center of this will be the university. But when we talk, and this is what you and Purba did on the podcast yesterday, you can't separate the American university from the U.S. state, which is the U.S. military. But Nuri said that the consensus, the scientific philosophical consensus that sustained the U.S. university for 75 to 80 years broke. But she also said it was clear for some time that consensus could not hold. I think that is where our work starts. The break, and we said that the collapse of string theory was more than just the collapse of a theory within theoretical physics, but a collapse of a worldview and one of the pillars of the scientific academy. And this thing, just again, because it was so impactful for me, that for some time it was apparent the consensus could not hold. I know another way sometimes it's that the center could not hold. That in the university, they say, well, it's the liberal university, but really it's the center of discourse that they control, it could not hold, and now it has broken. Can the university hold? Can the American dominance of knowledge and research, can it hold? This has huge consequences for Western civilization, and that's kind of what I think we're trying to work on, how to present this. I know this idea of a panel doing Einstein and Kant and Sun Ra could, if we could pull that off, if we can do it, it could have deep and profound meaning. When we finish this, I want to talk about, because we're going to interview Ishmael Muhammad next week. I think this science. Did you get what I just sent you? Okay. I think the music conference and the symposium on music are going to play very much into our interview with him. And I think both of these conferences and symposia will resonate with him and within the Nation of Islam.
Well, yeah, because the interview with Minister Ishmael Muhammad will be part of the upcoming fourth issue of our journal, Avant-Garde, and so we're hoping to have the journal issue ready in time to launch it at the conference.
I was going to say, I like what you brought up in the sense that the gatekeepers of information is collapsing. The progress of the Western world, and really the entire world, has been an extremely slow, incremental, knowledge base expanding amongst people. The church didn't want you to read. The resort didn't want you to learn how to read. I mean, everywhere has been to keep the masses of people ignorant. And in doing so, two things. One is the current American climate is a reaction, because even those who disagree with us would definitely agree that they're having struggle that Columbus didn't discover America. And that you can't smack people with new paradigms, because then that's why you see this reaction, because they are struggling with new information. I was taught that in school. They believed it. I did not. And the second thing is, so as this information gets out, but just as the Wizard of Oz, pay no attention to this cat behind the curtain, the reality is the universities also realize, that's why MIT and these other places are talking about free education now, because they realize they've created a climate where there's so many ignorant people that it's backlashing against their own situation. The whole system will collapse. In the past, big science, whether it's nuclear or whether it's cannons, but now there's a kid in his garage in New Delhi working on some new stuff that you're not ready. And I love the new super language models. They are going to blow the doors off. You're talking about AI. I mean, to understand AI, I don't even want to call it that. We are still in beta mode. This thing has not even, this really isn't, in my opinion, not even 1.0. It really is. And so the expansion of knowledge, of context, new narratives, and new power. And one of the things I want to lastly say is, when Du Bois was writing the Harlem Renaissance, when Kant was doing his work, when Schopenhauer was doing it, none of these people are in the majority. And it takes a long time for the world to catch up with these ideas. And the thought that you can lay out some breadcrumbs or some sweet candy. There was a lyric from Prince's music years ago, and it said, "How beautiful do the words have to be to conquer every heart?" And the answer is almost impossible. There is a willful ignorance and a rebellion against new information. If it upsets their paradigm, whether it's true or not, they don't want it. And so it takes courage to move
But
forward.
isn't there paradigm in crisis? See, this is new.
No, I'm telling you, it is in crisis.
Yes.
But understand, see, one of the problems I found about intellectual people, we don't know how to be stupid. Because there are still people that burn this whole thing down rather than to grow up into a new world.
Yes.
But okay, we think, oh, that don't make no sense. That's why Donald Trump's in office. Because that don't make no sense. None.
But let me say this. There are people who have many solutions. We have one. We have a solution. We think we have a solution. That's why the second day, and this is our challenge, not just to talk about the crisis, but to see where the solutions might lie. And this is why we had music, and this is why we do what we do, because you have to, you have the people who want to blow the world up, but then there might be another way out, and that's what we want to do.
Well, the voice has to be said.
Yes.
You cannot sit silent.
No, that's right. That's right. Oh, go ahead.
I had a question, which is, are we, as part of this science conference, are we planning to explore other alternate systems of or alternate centers of knowledge production? Mainly, I'm thinking about a place like China, and I think that I was reading an article just this morning where they were describing a kind of shift away from educating Chinese children in foreign universities, especially American or British universities. More parents are taking this decision to actually have them educated in China, in public schools, and sort of get them training in AI and robotics and computer science so that they can actually be, equipped to deal with like a very rapidly changing world. And yeah, that was just a question if planning to explore some of that.
I think that's an important question, and maybe this is a bit of a pivot towards Alice's, like what Alice is writing. Because I think the question of modernity and the rest of the world, especially us looking towards China, and in relation to what we're like really asking education and knowledge, like really in what direction, or like what is the crisis of modernity really, and in what direction does a civilization move forward? And my sense of it, or of how I see it, is that the crisis of modernity that we are faced with in this country is not simply a question of this country, but this is a stage of consciousness of the world. And I think the rest of the world is also, it is going to face the same crisis in different forms. So I don't think what we are trying to do here, I don't think that I don't know, like, I know this is not what you are saying, but it's not like the solution of what we're asking is going to come from somewhere else. But this is a question that it is to be faced by the entire world. And maybe this is what we are like definitely seeing is that the crisis is the most advanced in this country because of how where it's placed, and being at the being literally the center of empire, and therefore that's sort of my sense of it, that the question of knowledge moving forward is a question of consciousness moving forward. This is not something that determines the future of this country alone, but yeah.
You want to say something? You want to respond?
No, I'll just say that the reason why I was thinking about this is during our science reading groups, Raju and Nandita were saying how India is the place that produces a lot of these theoretical physicists interested in string theory. So there is so the way that I was thinking about is that this crisis may have originated here, and this is the major purveyor of the crisis, but it has reached far and wide into other countries, into other consciousness into the consciousness of people. And I feel like the grappling that we're trying to do with understanding modernity, what does it mean to actually engage in a new kind of colored modernity, has to kind of start here, but then also reach other places. I'm not entirely sure, but when I think of this crisis of knowledge, like naturally, my mind kind of also goes to these places like China and India and what they are trying to.
I don't know. Listen, I mean, this is a question that I know we've been very delicate in approaching. I know Alice is working on this, but we just don't know enough about the Chinese university.
Yeah.
I mean, we do know that they have produced more scientists, more engineers, more everything than anybody else in the world at a spectacular rate. But I think the questions that we are dealing with, I mean, I would be so happy to find some essays translated from China. Well, we don't have, y'all could be, I forgot we got Mandarin speakers here.
One word a minute.
It's awesome. But that's a fascinating question. But I think, I know I've talked to Alice about some of this. I don't think anybody is yet prepared to stand and say the Chinese Academy has gotten it right. Yeah. I know the Indians would say, no, the Indian University ain't hardly got it right. I mean, y'all would say they're too white.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. See what I'm saying? Go.
Well, a few weeks ago, you had brought up this lecture that Adam Tooze gave
Yes.
in Europe for this organization called the Asia Society. But one of the main kind of arguments and conclusions that he makes in that is that, like, in the same way that we talk about this like explosion of consciousness in the United States with like the Black Freedom Movement, the music which is produced in the 20th century by Black people, I feel like it's very similar in that, like, when he talks about the pace of development in Asia, like the explosion of basically, like human possibility of not just economic productivity, but like actual modernization. Like, I think he's basically saying, like Asia did in the span of like a couple decades what it took, Europe like several centuries to do. And I think this is like, in some ways, for people in America, people in the West, it's like something that you almost like can't wrap your mind around, like what this means, like the whole, like when we talk about the rise of Asia. And I do think it's important in the sense that it's like not even looking to like even like China for like the sole answer for things, but like in the way that we talk about like Duke, for example, his music is a world music. It's reflective of a world consciousness. And I think that's also very much how I understand, like even a person like Martin Luther King, where he had like not just was focused not just on American problems, but had a world consciousness. Like that's the whole point of his idea of like, a single garment of destiny, like a world house. And I think that it is very vital and important for even the American revolutionary process to have a sense of humanity and like where basically the axis of humanity and how is it changing and where is humanity moving, in order for us to basically meet the demands of like what is the new knowledge, what is the new way of knowing the world that is needed for essentially the emergence of a new epoch.
See, and we know that the Chinese have made these spectacular advances in science and technology. I mean, it's no one has ever seen it. But what about the human sciences?
But just the only other thing I'd add is I think part of the reason why we also want to frame this entire conference on knowledge as a civilizational question, I think that's sort of the lens in which the question of China also becomes, I guess that is how I would frame it more, where you're talking about two civilizational ideas or two civilizational histories in contrast with each other. What was able to be produced by one which basically lifted millions and millions of people from extreme poverty while also making these spectacular achievements in science, technology, and whatever, the economic realm and so on. And then you have this other civilization, which is the de facto leader of all civilizations since, I don't know, as many years as we want to put on it. But it claims it's basically the best because of its science and technology, and it claims it's the best because of its universities and the knowledge coming out of these universities. And yet it has not even, like, to say it has solved would be laughable. It has not even considered the question of poverty. It hasn't even considered. It doesn't even have a basically place for the human being or the. I mean, you know what I'm saying. So, like, in that contrast, I feel like something can be said about. That's sort of what makes sense to me.
Go ahead, man. I'm sorry.
Just want you to comment, please, on the fact that we have a situation in the Sahel Belt, West Africa.
Right.
With, Niger and Chad, where we had three young, and Mali, we had three young generals. Whatever you want to call it, who said no more of this French treatment. No more of this. And we have Ibrahim Traore in Burkina Faso, which is an interesting place. I've been there, who's trying to develop his own industries. He's made, I don't know, whatever. So we're talking about micro scale in terms of when you compare it to China and the West. I hope that the conference finds a way to discuss how do we do micro scale development to improve the human condition. We can do it in miniature. A place like Brunei, Hong Kong, or Singapore, they're small places, but they're developed and
We're going to try. This is very significant because hopefully this is a reawakening of a new militant Pan-Africanism in West Africa. I have my fingers crossed because Thomas Sankara is Burkina Faso and was assassinated. And they tried to assassinate Tagore. So, but yes, we will.
Whole issue, the way he talks about. Then we had a black gentleman here. It pissed me off, criticizing him after using his own wealth, his gold to do something creative. So the question is, how do we help people in these micro situations?
Well, one thing, we help them. Let me just give you my, because I have to talk on a podcast Monday or Tuesday on this. See, the alignment with these powerful forces of multipolarity, in the front of which are China and Russia. And it was so important that Traore was at the 80th anniversary of the defeat of Nazism, and let it be known that he was in a close relationship with Putin, and he wasn't making any bones about it. And but this is very important, and that's why the achievements of China in science and technology are so important to Africa.
Well,
But
there's a danger there too in the way things get exported. In terms of, you put all your work to build a plant, local people don't steal.
that's right. But 25 million people cannot stand up against Western imperialism alone. That's why. I mean, back in my day, we had the Soviet Africa Alliance, but that's our day. Yeah. And to me, it's very fulfilling to see it. But see, and then we're gonna go on to the next thing. But see, we have a problem here, and the use of reactionary Black people to intervene against progressive Africans. You understand? I saw with my own eyes. Where they said, well, Sekou Touré, he's a communist. Modibo Keita, he's a communist. He's in alignment with the Soviet Union and China. And then, see, we got to take care of our own house because our house ain't right.
But on a far more prosaic level, we're gonna have a conference about science, can't wait for it.
Yeah.
But there's a whole thing about science with the microchip.
I hear you. I can dig that.
So how do we talk about even something like the maker movement here in the States, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with? What the maker movement? The maker movement basically was about micro reindustrialization of America. So you had these different places called maker spaces. You go in there, they got CNC computing, how to cut metal, all sorts of other skills that can be learned.
Yeah.
Maker spaces, and then you got building an airplane.
But see, but what we're doing is, but just to be clear, what we're doing is talking about a huge crisis of civilization. Now, we're not against, okay, go ahead, you go ahead. I don't
No, absolutely. We're talking about that micro crisis, macro crisis. But Charlotte and the Sahel Belt there, which is a site of medieval kingdoms, Mali, Guanu, etc., they had their own civilization at one time.
Right.
The question is, how do we interact with them? How do they reinterpret their own local culture, Islamic culture, along with their own indigenous knowledge that they had? The earliest ceramics that were made in Africa were discovered in Burkina Faso.
Okay.
Okay. So what I'm trying to say is that all of this,
We have to. I feel
micro. How do we help people do micro things that have? We're not going to be as big as China, but can you get this level of success and decrease infant mortality and people able to eat and ending, at a micro scale? How does one intensely do that? That's an interesting question to me.
Definitely.
Hell,
Definitely.
we could talk about doing it in South Carolina. We don't even have to never achieved there in some communities. It hasn't been achieved there. Across the West Baltimore.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And West.
Okay, we just have one other thing, just to say, we're going to do the interview in Chicago on Thursday and Friday with Ishmael Mohammed, the assistant to Minister Louis Farrakhan, and we, Naya and Jahan and Meghna did a lot of good work and they agreed. And there's not been a significant interview with Ishmael Muhammad since 2006, And he is an extraordinary person. His mother and his father, his mother's Mother Tainetta, his father is the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And I sent out an interview that he did. I think will be very, if you listen to it, you can get a sense of him, the type of man he is. He is an extraordinary. Did I send it to you? I'll send it to you. And it will be for avant-garde. So it'll be at least 4 hours. And Michelle and Albert are going to do photos and maybe to video. Oh, wow, that's very important.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to try our best. Yeah,
Say it again?
we're going to try our best.
Yeah,
That'd be really awesome.
it'll be very important for us. And Meghna and Naya and Jahan we discussed questions that they have. They have some very, very good questions. Well, I'm just very excited about it. Very, very excited. Yes, I just wanted to report that. I don't think
Maybe we could do comments.
Oh, comments, comments.
Okay. I haven't asked any comments, but Todd, Michelle, Brother Gregory Muhammad,
Okay, Brother Gregory said, peace and blessings, family. Thank you for all that you do, remembering the greatness of our, and especially thank you to Dr. Montero. BK said, you all did a great job. And then Michelle says, preschool should have invited Bootsy. Great job. In her opinion, the analysis of Bootsy and Funk didn't get enough time.
Yeah.
BK says, a separate symposium could have been dedicated just to Funk, but they all have full-time jobs. I'm sure this took a lot. Which is true. Michelle says, yeah, preschool should have been Bootsy, but I'm pretty sure he needs more than 3 weeks notice, LOL. She says that probably many musicians can't make it unless things are booked months in advance because they have gigs and stuff. And let's see. She also says, I feel Jimi Hendrix was a revolutionary artist. A lot of visual art doesn't make sense, not even to the artist. That's the way some music is. It just exists and doesn't always have beauty. Some might not even have anything. And then Bombala said, hi, I missed school today. I have to go to a music gig to play my gig congas and sing. And then people in the chat were saying, good luck, Bombala. Wishing he could stay. Megna was watching just now and she said she's really excited. They're all really excited for the interview. And she says, I keep thinking of the dinner scene in Du Bois's novel, Dark Princess, when Matthew stuns the darker nations by singing. It's so relevant to all of this, with the singing of Go Down Moses. And then Kendra Tatum says, I can't wait to see an analysis of female revolutionary.
What?
Female revolutionary. That's all.
We did it in 2018.
Huh?
Remember during the year of Du Bois, you guys celebrated Nina Simone and
Yeah, Indira Gandhi, Winnie Mandela, yeah,
Nina Simone.
yeah.
And
Coretta, Shirley Graham Du Bois.
nice.
Okay.
Oh, I guess I agree.
Oh yeah, so what I heard that you won't be back next week until Saturday evening, Sunday. So could we do preschool remotely?
You want to do it? Yeah, I think so. I would.
Well, yeah, I think we should do preschool remotely, unless you want to just skip preschool.
And I think we could record an interview with Ishmael Muhammad.
Okay, so we'll see people next week. It'll just be a split screen between Chicago and Philly. So
We still meet here.
yeah, I think Philly people can meet here, and the Chicago people can meet wherever you are.
Yeah. Yeah, Joe.
Yeah.
Vegas.
We'll discuss. We will discuss. Okay. Bye to our online listeners.
Bye.
And I think we have one more thing on the agenda.